Hey guys, how are you doing? Let's start with a pretty short clip from the Matrix rather than some intro music this time. A lot of the philosophy in the Matrix is, of course, incorrect and not the actual way the world works. But this one part should kind of get us in the mood for this particular webinar. We're going to get to the bottom of things today in a way that in some ways it makes it more difficult to kind of get all the way to the bottom of things. It's pretty easy to teach about kind of topics that are close to the surface. But on the other hand, this will be ultimately, as we explore this and really get you guys over to the other side with this, it should be just unbelievable difference. I know Mike Long has just very much liked, I've shared with him over the last couple of weeks some of the things that I'll be talking about and revealing on this webinar, and it's he just loves it. So that's at least one one testimonial there. Okay, I will play this and then we will get started. Oh, sorry, and one other thing is, of course, we can talk to each other a bit in the two Facebook groups on the pinned post there. There we go, exactly, Andrew's watching.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
All right, so there we have it. Okay, let's, first I'll share my webcam here. Hey, there we go. Now I will close it, so I'm not staring at myself on my, sorry, I'm just closing it for myself. You won't notice a thing when I close it, but this way I won't stare at myself talk. And put my screen over. What if we take both? I like that. All right, let me get to, all right, let's go over here. Now, I may have referred to some of the ideas that I'll talk about here a little bit on the last webinar on Alchemy 1, but we're really going to go straight for something pretty cool, almost the intersection of two ideas. And we're going to keep going, right? We're going to go in June, and then I'm going to go double up, 2 per week, and really just be looking to delve in and get people over to the other side, as I say, and really get this during the next 4 months after that. So we're going to continue to develop things. I'll be introducing new ideas throughout that time, and we'll be looking at some more surface topics and applying them. But we need to start somewhere, so we will continue today in this beautiful Memorial Day during the afternoon, which might not have been the best scheduling decision. But I wanted to get a little bit, some of these where people in the UK and so forth can catch them live. Probably next week will be at night again. And I probably won't go for like as long as I went last time today, maybe hour, 15 minutes, hour and a half, but we'll see. Well, when the first shot's fired, then the plan goes to heck, right? So we'll see what happens. Okay, so what I have here on my screen, all right, this took me forever to get to this point where, oops, sorry, I'm just closing something that was, okay, it really, because you can even tell if you look at some of my other recordings, I didn't fully understand some of, or a lot of what I'll be sharing with you here in this webinar. It didn't make my other stuff incorrect, but it, to get a little deeper and easier to figure out what's the block, like what's holding people back with trying to fully get and apply law of implication and the things that I show and talk about. Because we want to get to where it's not just where you're getting nuggets from me, but where we really kind of get to the foundation of things. All right, we're going to be delving into this to an idea of I wrote the words foundational anti-helpless or anti-helplessness I could have put here. Oops. Okay. And when I wrote on the preview for this webinar, I talked about that I would cover something here that would also give you a very different option or effectiveness in controlling your mind. And it's not really about controlling your mind, as I've said in other recordings, but the effect you're trying to get in terms of controlling your mind, you're going to be able to get in a different game-changing way with a related idea. There's depending on how you slice and dice it, we could say it's one idea, we could say it's two ideas that are related. The two ideas, just to start to name them, but it's of course going to take some explanation. We want to be careful not to try to marginalize or put things in a box too quickly with the things I talk about. But one is, I was trying to figure out, I had this idea for a long time, and if you've heard some of my other recordings, you may have heard me refer to the mind as a goal-achieving mechanism. And you may have heard me talk about how we are not our mind or our body, that we're something else, something that's conscious, and that our mind and body are actually not conscious. I've been trying to get to the bottom of what is it that's kind of by default driving people's minds, and also driving them in a way where there's although people function okay and they have success in various levels, there's also a certain consistent blind spot and a consistent set of mistakes that people are making. And I try to figure out what's at the bottom of it. Is it the drive to survive, or is it toward pleasure? People stay away from pain, or what's going on? And I finally hit upon how something works very deep down in our model for the world and our belief system that is incredibly effective in practice for changing the game in this way. And what's going on, and I said there was two related ideas. One, let me just skip here to the slide. I'm just going to come out and say this, and then continue from there. I wasn't quite sure how this would flow, but I just want to come out and describe this to you. And this is, I could have put step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 here. I didn't write that, but we can think of it that way. And this is kind of how things go wrong or go suboptimally. I'm skipping over all of the, you've heard me reference things here and there, but I'm skipping over right now all of the background in why it is, or how, and all the indications and so forth of why something is going wrong. And it's not just, oh, the world's going to pot or something like that. It's that things that we kind of all take for granted and agree upon, and experts and so forth, those are still wrong. Like, for example, American liberalism and American conservatism, and I'm not only singling out America, I'm just saying for example here, just because this is where I live. They're both far off, right? And one's kind of liberalism is kind of a rebellion against conservatism, but they're both really not even close to correct. And so there's an example. And yet pretty much everyone's going to subscribes to either one of those two, or some just moderated mishmash of the two. So that's one example. Or when it just comes to getting work done, right? Why do so few people drive Rolls Royces, right? They're pretty nifty to drive. I guess they only make a certain amount. But plenty of people that can afford them, don't drive them. Why do so many people get locked into a number of how much they can make that is pretty much an average of what the people made living around them when they were growing up, right? That's an extremely strong predictor of what people make, right? It shouldn't be that way. So wherever you look on different scales, when it comes to money, when it comes to relationships, why are people I said I was going to skip over this, but I'm about to skip over it. But something as simple as if you find someone that you really like, a significant other, and you are lying in bed with them just talking, cuddling, doing whatever, being intimate sexually. That's pretty great, right? And people do stuff where they're pretty much not accomplishing anything in their lives that's going to be that important, and yet, so it basically ends up being entertainment, or it might be work, but it kind of ends up being a hobby or circular in nature. They'll do work, and they'll spend the money that they make from working on some form of trying to be happy, and the whole end result of them working and spending that money and doing or consuming what they spent the money on, none of it is something they themselves like as much as just kind of lying in bed, talking or being sexually intimate with their partner, or with potentially a partner or whatever. But still, you can take two people who are in a relationship and they still won't do that as much as they themselves would enjoy doing. And there's just another example. So constantly you can look, and I could go on for months, right, with these things that genuinely don't fit. As you carry them through, they just don't make sense. We constantly don't want to do tasks that we ourselves think would help us. And yet we feel like we don't want to do them, but logically it only makes sense that our brain would make us want to do them because another part of our mind concludes that we want to accomplish that task. So all over the place we're kind of stuck where we just constantly kind of can't win. And people come to the wrong conclusions. And with evolution, it was one of the places that woke me up, where if you look at that field, people are so talking past each other, creationists, evolutionists, and so forth. And I saw that, and it was just kind of bizarre, where there was and they would talk past each other, and there was no sense of trying to get on a playing field where they could both talk, and just on and on and on. Right? If you look at government, obviously it's just all kinds of things that are contradictory to what would just be better for people going on. So what's going on? And what's going on, and what can be such a game changer for you as this gets integrated and understood, is that starting with at infancy, right? You identified with your mind and your body, or you could imagine that your mind itself was just working automatically to get you going, right? To keep you alive and get you growing and so forth. So the mind, of course, would identify with itself, right? It's your mind. It's not you. It's just this mechanism, and it's there to again keep you alive and so forth. But what happened is this assumption of helplessness. So at the very core of our belief system and our model for the world is the assumption that we're helpless. Like I referenced this on the first Alchemy. And this is going to take an interesting twist as I continue. So it's not just that we have this assumption of helplessness. But I said if we build a fortress, and we're all excited about how impregnable the fortress is and how powerful it is, then the interesting thing is that actually carries the assumption that if someone were to break into the fortress, then they would kick our ass, right? Or they'd win, or they'd defeat us, or something, right? If all I'm talking about is how good how I'm secure because the fortress is great, and I don't reference what happens after people get in, or if they were to get in, then I might in fact be pretty well secure because of the fortress, but there's an underlying assumption of helplessness if someone were to get into it. That helps us picture a little bit of what's going on. But the kicker here is, so I'll continue, but we'll get to the kicker. So we assume that the default situation of ourselves, of who we are, is helplessness, like as an infant, right? And then I wrote, these are just some kind of notes, so this won't make a lot of sense as written. Construct model to use as foundation. All right. Imagine an infant mind. It actually can't really know what's true, but it needs to move forward. And even right now, we have a whole defending against seeing what I'm saying. So, that's the kicker that I'm getting to. But the idea is we can't move forward, and this is going to turn out to be false in a certain way. It's true in a certain way, and it's false in kind of a deeper way. You can't climb a mountain if you're sitting there trying to figure out whether you're on the right mountain. And so if we figure we need to get climbing, then we're going to want to believe that we're on the right mountain. That relates to local peak theory, that relates to the picture that I had to go with this webinar. And I'm going to also get to that and develop that a little bit more. The idea of climbing a mountain versus figuring out which mountain to climb and so forth, and how we can get stuck by we climb and then we don't want to go. If we figure out, if we could have otherwise figured out we're on the wrong mountain, we instead just want to believe we're on the right mountain. Let's close this here. Whoops. Okay. So if we track what happened, there's the starting idea of helplessness, and plus there's the idea that we need to get going in life. We can't just sit there and not move or whatever. And we're not equipped to figure out what's truly going on. And so instead we construct a model for the world. And then we end up doing something that we can think of as like triangulation. I didn't write that word down here. But in essence, if we see something from a few different angles, then we develop a working theory that that's how it is. Just to illustrate what I mean, let's suppose, it doesn't exactly work this way because it's such instinctive thought, but let's suppose we cry and someone comes and feeds us, and then we cry and someone comes and feeds us again. Then we start to develop a model of the world where if we cry, then someone will come and feed us. Now, if you if an infant is exposed to a situation where it cries and that cry is mostly ignored, then it will start to develop a different model of the world, right, in which it's not sure whether its basic needs will be met, and then there'll be a kind of a sense of panic at the heart of an infant's kind of mind or their developing model of the world, and that can be detrimental for various reasons. I said it all just by way of illustrating what I mean. I'm not focused on that right now, whether we should respond to an infant or not. But that helps illustrate how the infant will start to develop a model for the world based on a few instances of things happening or seeing things from a few angles. And then if our model seems to generally work, then it gets even more solidified. There's another thing going on. I'm not sure how critical this is to mention right now, but I'll say it. It isn't just if there's evidence that once a model starts to get made, then the way our minds actually work is it serves to protect that model, that belief in the way the world is. It isn't like our mind functions like a curious, objective scientist all the time. Instead, it functions to protect beliefs once they get started and to confirm those. And again, it's related to this idea of, in order to move forward and take action, there's the idea that we need to, it's the wrong idea of faith that I introduced last time. It's the idea that we're supposed to believe that we're already on the right mountain, right, and start climbing. And so we'll want to protect that. But with all this being said, so there's the default situation of helplessness, and then that helplessness includes the idea of understanding the world, really, understanding what's really going on. Instead of true knowledge and true understanding, there is instead what our mind did was it started to construct a substitute because it's all it knew how to do. All our mind can do on its own without a conscious rebuilding of the whole system, which couldn't really happen when we're 0 or 1 year old. It couldn't have happened until maybe we were 12, or who knows, right? I don't know exactly. Maybe 7, maybe 12, maybe 20, maybe 30. But at some point, we could have reconstructed the system, but unfortunately, it was so reinforced at that time. And there's a secondary defense. That's the real thing that I'm getting to here, that I haven't quite gotten to, but I allude to it, and I'm building to where you can understand a bit what I'm saying when I say it. All the mind could do when we're an infant is all this is mildly difficult to try to explain, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. But I think about it nonstop, so I better than I otherwise could be, based on at least a bunch of work. All right. the real way to have true understanding involves something that you need to interact with your mind consciously. That couldn't happen when you're an infant or one. And so it needed to construct a model of the world that isn't based on true knowledge or true understanding. It's based on, we could call perception. We could call it also naive realism. Naive realism is how we all kind of by default interact with the world, even though philosophers, scientists, and so forth, and any of us, if we think about it, can realize it's not really true. Naive realism is like what you see is what you get. Like that you open your eyes and you look at the world. Or when you remember something, we tend to be naive realists when it comes to memory. We tend to feel like how we remember something is how it really happened, or pretty darn close to how it really happened. And experiments have shown how far off that actually is. But in order to get us started, when we're an infant, this naive realism assumption was, and I acknowledge I'm glossing over that pretty quickly. It'll be something we can delve into again a bit in the future, but I have to gloss over a lot to get to anywhere, right? With this point, there's a lot we'll develop over time. But it's this idea that what you see is what you get. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what to delve into, what to gloss over, because I want to continue here. The big deal, let me just hop straight to the big deal, and then we can backtrack and expand how we need to. The big thing that was hard to figure out, and I was trying to figure out what is it, I knew that people's minds fight strongly and defend strongly against a certain type of thing, a certain idea or set of ideas that I'm trying to help people to understand, that are so beneficial, so true, so knowably true. But there's something in the way, something blocking us. And what it is it isn't that people realize that they're starting with the assumption that they're helpless and then say, oh yeah, I feel helpless, but I only feel not helpless because of resources, relationships, a belief in my own self-image, and that I'm already smart and good and all that. Instead, something very different is going on. And this is the kind of red pill, blue pill situation. You are going to have a very, very powerful feeling, but it's so powerful, its power is gained by hiding itself from you. But it's going to squirm around and try to twist what I'm saying. It's going to try to make it feel unimportant, what I'm saying, or like I'm droning on, or that you have a headache, or all sorts of things are going to, so it's not going to fight directly, but it's going to fight very powerfully by trying to squirm in various ways. And what our whole model of our whole belief system and our understanding of the world and our understanding of ourselves has its basis in a defense, a defensiveness, and this is very counterproductive, but it's a defense to make you not even aware that at the heart is this idea of helplessness, that you're helpless. Instead, and any kind of self-improvement book you're going to read and suggestion is going to cater to this defensiveness. It's not going to try to fight it like I'm trying to fight it. All right? At times it might feel, depending on how I did this, I'm maybe doing this in a way that doesn't feel like I'm attacking you. At times there's things I can say and there's things I might need to say that might feel like an attack. But we need to do this. We need to get through this. If we can get through this together for you, then the difference will be astronomical and oddly empowering beyond belief, because right up until this point, almost certainly in life, you've had to compensate for an assumption of helplessness. The idea of feeling like you're powerful and being told that you're powerful is all essentially some version of telling you that you have a strong fortress and that your fortress is stronger than you think, and that you can have more money than you realize, and that you can have better relationships, and all these things that are nice for getting more goodness in your life, but as a compensation for feeling helplessness, or as a defense, or as a fortress against the assumption of helplessness, they're not helpful. You can actually have much better relationships and make more money and have a different more wonderful self-image if it's all no longer a defense against a hidden idea of starting out feeling helpless. And because I was trying to figure out why the heck is it that no one's even trying to really figure out or spend time focusing on how do we really know what's true. That should be the fundamental question we need to figure out in life, because how can you have any other thoughts or have any discussion with people or figure out what to do today or figure out whether you're a good person or whatever, or what's good or what can be good to do for you or for others. How can you do any of that unless you can distinguish what's true? And then I finally figured this out, is that to confront the issue for real of how to know what's true, we would have to start by confronting actually being helpless regarding knowledge. We have to confront the idea that we don't yet know how to know what's true. We don't yet know whether we're supposedly a good person or smart or not. We have to actually confront that and stare it dead in the face. But our most powerful drive, in essence, of our mind is to protect us from confronting this helplessness. Ironically, the only way to really have the true sense of the power that you do have is to confront this helplessness dead on. So life can be easy and can be way more wonderful than even you experience now. But the only way to get there is through this illusory wall, or this illusory, scary, terrible thing that you are going to have this part of your mind trying to fight against. And again, it fights powerfully and subtly by you could almost see it if you've gone through my stuff in the past. There's a way that people keep squirming away from the central idea of it. But we can stop doing that now. I think that now that I've realized to explain it in just this way, and I'm going to keep at it, then I think we can do it. I think we can get through it. And this is what I did. So let me approach this from a different angle. Taking a look at life as a strategist and stepping back and think what's really going on, then there's an interesting thing going on. We are sometimes happy. We have some amount of resources and some amount of free will. Right? If we deny any of those things, it doesn't make sense. The opposite of any of those things doesn't make sense. We experience some good and some bad, right? Like we feel good, just simplistically speaking, but correctly speaking. We feel good sometimes, we feel worse sometimes. We'd rather feel better than worse, right? That's one. We have some amount of resources. We don't maybe know exactly what those are as we're just stepping back and just thinking about what's really going on. But looking at this way is pretty cool. We're sometimes happy, sometimes feel good, sometimes don't feel good. We want to feel good more, right? And ideally, another indication that there's a deep assumption of helplessness is why doesn't everyone explicitly realize that we want the world to be perfect or as good as it can be, right? Without knowing how good that can be, and that we want everyone to be maximally happy. Why isn't that obvious to people? The only reason that wouldn't be obvious, we would have to assume that we're helpless and be protecting ourselves from that in order to not just be going for what otherwise would be obvious. Well, what else could we want but for everyone to be maximally happy, including ourselves? But people dumb down their goal from that, right? People don't explicitly have that goal generally. And so the only reason to dumb it down would be to pretend like we're not helpless, right? People shrink their goals, and then they come up with their own standards for how they're successful in order to feel like they're successful. But how can we name it a success if everyone's not maximally happy? How is that a success? Doesn't make any sense. So some people are unhappy and suffering, and we're going to say that we've won, right? What does success mean, right? Like you've won. How have we won if people are suffering, if people are unhappy? Right? That's not the idea that the phrase "good enough" is actually an inherent contradiction in terms. Is it good enough? Unless we're dealing in an artificially kind of stipulated or in there's ways that we can narrowly define terms that within that something could be quote unquote good enough. But in general, is it good enough, or are we unsatisfied? Is misunderstood. It's used in the wrong way. You can not be unsatisfied. People think you have to be unsatisfied. That saying it's not good enough means you're unsatisfied. That's ridiculous. What you want to understand is that we want things to be maximally good. We can respond to everything in life. I'm going to say something pretty cool here. We can respond to everything in life pretty much with one of two responses. Appreciation or gratitude. That's one thing. Or curiosity. Period. Never has to be, at a fundamental level, we don't need to respond to anything in life without one of those two things. So if we have a compound situation, a complex situation that contains both good and bad, then we can appreciate whatever might be good and then be curious about how to either get rid of the bad, or if there could be more good, curious about how we could have even more good. So appreciation, curiosity covers all our bases there all the time in one way of looking at life. Interesting, right? Okay, going back to saying if we step back, so we have some good, some bad. We don't need to be unsatisfied in order to want maximum good, more good. That's just obviously the way, we just have to understand correctly in order to realize, of course, we want more good for ourselves and for other people. That doesn't involve being unsatisfied. We can fully appreciate whatever good there is and whatever good opportunity there is. We appreciate that, and then we're curious how we can understand even better so that then we take action even better and we have more good. Okay, so that's one. Now, we also have some amount of resources. If you were to say, well, we have no resources, and that kind of goes hand in hand with some amount of power or leverage. Maybe leverage is a perfect word. We have some amount of will or inherent power. If we had absolutely zero inherent power, and now we see that power is best understood in terms of goodness, in terms of do we have any ability whatsoever to affect the goodness in our life. See, it's going to turn out that in identifying with our mind and body, the idea of goodness gets twisted. Our mind isn't conscious. It doesn't experience goodness. In order to experience goodness, you have to be conscious. So to our mind, there's not a similar idea of what good can mean. And I've explained this in the past, but now I'm explaining it within this context. Your mind can only have a twisted idea of good, which is that which helps it to further the goals that the mind has installed or is working on. But goodness, that's a twisted idea of goodness. If you identify with your mind and body, yes, you're helpless. Someone can come along and shoot you. Someone can come along and shoot me, my mind, my body. They can shoot my body. I can't fully defend against that. If I define power in terms of my body and can accomplish anything like on earth, that I can beat out other people, that I can be assured of not being shot or stopped regarding something that my body is trying to do, then yeah, I'm helpless. If the only way I cannot be helpless is if I'm untouchable, I'm impregnable, and my body's unstoppable, as soon as I define terms in that way, as soon as I understand the world in that way, then I am inherently helpless except for whatever leverage I get. Then yeah, I want more relationships, more guns, right? More violence, more whatever. If that's what as I fundamentally understand the world. But what we can do in order to understand power and anti-helplessness properly and have a different foundation at the very root of our model for the world and our understanding of the world and our image of who we are and everything. If we understand that power must be connected instead to the ability to have an influence on the goodness that we experience and on the goodness that other people experience. In that case, we have some power, we must. I haven't gotten into exactly how we can know what's true yet, but I've indicated it in various places. I've talked about it directly in the Overview and Rundown series, and I'm going to talk about it directly in this Alchemy series. But one indication is if you can't possibly act upon something, if it's so absurd that you couldn't take any action based on it, then the opposite must be true. So it's literally impossible to act on the idea that you're powerless, that you're fully powerless. If nothing you can possibly do as a conscious being or whoever you are, if nothing you can do can affect the goodness at all of your experience or other people's, then you can't act. There's no action. There's literally, it means, literally everything you do is literally meaningless, right? Again, if you say you have no power, if we stipulate or if we try to have the premise or the assumption, or whatever you want to call it, and I'm showing how the opposite is absurd. The opposite of the idea that you have some power is that you have none. That has to be wrong because it strips everything out of meaning. And there's no reason, you can't act upon it. Everything that you would do from here on out would inherently contradict the idea that you have no power, right? Because there's no reason to do it. You have no power, you have no ability to act on anything. So we don't need to assume. We never need to assume. We can stipulate or we can understand. We don't have to stipulate in this case. We can understand it has to be true that you have some power. But even if you aren't comfortable with the idea that you fully know that that's correct, you can stipulate it. And you can come back to it later if you want. Stipulate means you're going to not assume it's true, but you're going to state, okay, I'm going to state that this is a foundation that I'm going to work off of. I'm going to state that I'm going to operate as if that was true. This is true. I've said before, it's totally reasonable to believe as if something's true. What you can't do is you can't believe that something is true. That's a contradiction in terms. Anytime someone says that, it shows that they fundamentally misunderstand the nature of everything. To say that I believe something is true makes no sense. It's inherently nonsensical. You either understand how to know it perfectly, correctly, or you don't know whether it's true or not. In neither case would you say I believe it. You either say I know it because you properly know it, or you would say I don't know. So you can either know properly with the right method, or you don't know. But you can stipulate and you can act as if something is true. That's completely rational and necessary. So we have some amount of power, right? The first idea had to do with goodness. There's some goodness, some badness, or some lack of total goodness. We want to have more goodness, one way or the other. Even if there was no bad, we'd still want to have more good. That's one. Number two is we have some amount of power, period. So again, what we're doing here is we're just stepping back and looking at things from another angle. We have some amount of power, but we have to understand power not as the ability to make the world exactly as we want, to shape the environment in a way that we're unstoppable, or in the way that we can make our change in the environment as big as possible, that we're so strong and can manipulate people so well and all that. Once we understand power that way, then we're on the wrong track. If we understand, and if you had the power to literally do anything you wanted in the world, like you're omnipotent in that way, if you had a genie who would do anything you said, there's all these stories of that, right? And then that wouldn't even guarantee you happiness, right? You could say, oh, I want this, and then you'd end up not being happy, right? So it wouldn't even necessarily help you. What you really want is goodness, right? Happiness. It's okay to simplistically blend those ideas right now, happiness and goodness. That's okay. We'll stipulate those are kind of ultimately one and the same. And that'll work fine for now. So the real power is the power to consciously, to do something where consciously you have more goodness rather than less. And when you understand that power, there's some power that you have that can't be stopped. No one can stop it. No matter what they do to constrain your body or whatever, then as long as you're conscious in some way, then you can use whatever power that you have in order to have more goodness starting from that point. And that can't be stopped. If it wasn't the case that you had the power to make goodness, then you basically just nothing would have meaning. You would be non-conscious or functionally non-conscious. Nothing would matter. That's not the case right now. So, and if it ever is the case, then you can worry about it then. All right? But anyone that's listening right now, it's not the case. The case is that you have power you must have some sort of power to make your life better. And that can also involve the lives of others that you can communicate, that you can affect better. You must have some power. Remember, if you don't, then literally everything's meaningless, and you can't act on that. You're going to contradict the idea that you have no power the next moment. So anyone that claims, maybe I don't have power, they must have power. Again, I already covered that just now. So you definitely have some power, and it can't be stopped. If anyone could stop you from having that power, then again, everything would be meaningless. You would have no ability to do anything to make yourself happier or make your life better. Worst case, you can say, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But that certainly isn't the case right now for you. So you have a power that actually is unstoppable. And then the question is, once you realize that, then you can start to be a detective and figure out what that power is. And I have an understanding of that. I've been working on that for a long time. And I have a very, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I have a very, very good understanding of that power. But the critical thing is, the whole ball of, in essence, we just need to get on the other side of this illusionary wall together. We need to get to where you understand that you must have power to have more goodness, always. That means you're fundamentally not helpless, no matter what. No matter what your business is like, no matter what feedback you get from the world, no matter whether you've been good in the past, no matter how smart you already are, your self-image, no matter what your self-image is, you no longer need to be defensive. Everything until this point has likely been built as a defense, and including a protecting you from realizing it's a defense. That's the key, right? It's not that you just have a defense against being helpless. The really important thing is you have a defense to protect the defense. That's the issue. That's the illusion. That's what fights against me and what I'm trying to help you with here. That's what's fighting against you and me in essence. But it's not a conscious thing fighting against us. It's just a default. It's just like a river, a current going in a certain direction, or a car that's going in a certain direction. It might feel like the car is fighting you, or the car wants to drive into a house, or drive into the side of the road or into a tree. But the car doesn't want to do that in the sense of consciously having willpower to do it. That's just inertia. Okay? So this defense to keep the defense, this defensiveness that you're not defensive about feeling helpless, that's just inertia. But it's a powerful, potentially powerful inertia, and it's going to it can probably beat me, so to speak, all by itself without your help. So I'm probably going to need your help to overcome it in your mind, right? Not for myself to overcome it for me, but I'm probably going to need you consciously helping me on my side, fighting with you and you fighting with me for you, to help you break through this illusionary barrier and come out the other end where you no longer need to defend the defense. You know, the defense is your self-image, and everything to do with resources that you have in order to say if someone says, are you happy or are you okay in life, and you think, sure, I'm okay. I have my family, I have my job or my business, or I have some money in the bank, and I'm a pretty smart person and I'm a pretty good person. All of that's a defense. If that's your answer to why you're okay or why you're successful, then that's all a defense. That's all a fortress. That's implying that you're actually helpless without those things. That's the defense. But then there's the defense for the defense. And that is if someone attacks your self-image, or if someone attacks resources, then you feel like you're really under attack and you feel like, whoa, all right? If someone attacks something very important for your self-image, you can respond in a very powerful way, right? But let's think about the practical effect that has. What if there's wrong ideas that got in your mind about how the world works when you were an infant, or when you were 3, or when you were 5? Right? Nearly everyone is the religion of their parents, especially if you get outside in the Western world. And I'm giving some sweeping generalizations, but there's still an interesting point to this. In the Western world, generally, there's not a lot of sense of family compared to most of the other part of the world. There's a little less feeling of tribalism or family. There's still plenty of it, but it's not as strong as other cultures have much more emphasis on family and respect for parents and elders. And there's much less of that in the West than there is in most other places and throughout history. So there's less of being the same religion as your parents, but it's still extremely strong predictor of what religion people will be. And then in cultures where respect for elders and parents is even stronger, then there's even more correlation between the religion of the parents and the children. But then they conflict, right? Religions. So if there's all these conflicting ideas, and yet people really defend against their beliefs and their religion and so forth. But one of the things I did years ago was I looked around and said, if so many people are the same religion as their parents, then it's going to seem right to me too like it means that ideas that you already have seem right to you, and in a way where most everyone has to be wrong, right? Because these religions conflict. So if most everyone is wrong, often what people do is they look around, they see how other people are wrong, and it makes people feel even more superior because their defense kicks in, right? Their defense kicks in, and people feel even more superior. People look at Nazis or anything like that, slavers 200 years ago in the South, whatever, and people will feel even more like they've got to be right because they're not slavers, they're not Nazis. What instead is rational to think, or the experiment, right? The famous experiment with the giving electric shocks, and how every single participant, when given repeated, calm, strong, assertive commands from an authority figure, gave a massive dose of electricity to a test subject, but they didn't know it was an actor. Right? They thought it was a real thing going on. People hear that, and, oh, not me. And that's your defense against the defense kicking in. But the rational response to that is say, whoa, I would do the same thing unless I have a real reason. And the reason can't just be, oh, I'm superior inherently. When I was 1 or when I was 5, my parents are so right, and our culture is so right, and all the ideas I absorbed when I was 5 and 3 and since then are so right that that's the reason, oh, I would never be a Nazi. Oh, I would never be a slaver if it was too. You need a real fundamental reason why you wouldn't be. And I can maybe give you some real-world examples going on right now that are parallel, or at least close enough. Even if something's 1/10 as bad as being a Nazi, that's still pretty horrible, right? But where it's normal in our culture to think those things. So I said there were 2 major ideas. Let me try to tie off some things here. A big reveal here then is this kind of one of the 2 ideas is that at the core of, and this will be so helpful for you, by the way, in dealing with other people. This is going to be so helpful for you for sales and conversion, getting clients, convincing people of anything, and influencing others. As we develop this with each other, or as you develop it for yourself, but certainly I'll help you. Week after week, I'll be helping you develop this. But this is going to make such a foundational difference in your ability to do business and convert and influence others, and influence your own mind, including the next thing I'll show you, which is related, and which I referred to actually on this first slide about the word arbitrary. But this first idea, before I get to the arbitrary idea, which is related, but I'm also distinguishing it, is core is helplessness. Then there's defense. But then the big deal is the defense for the defense. That people want to defend their self-image. And I was saying, is it helpful to defend your self-image? Well, it's extremely unhelpful to be defensive about your defenses, right? Your defenses like your self-image. If you're defensive about your self-image, then, and you see this, it's easy to see in other people. We at least can see in others that they have some wrong ideas. But they defend some wrong ideas people don't mind. Because why? They're not part of their core self-image. They're not part of their defense. They're not part of why that person feels powerful. Or they're not part of protecting that person against feeling helpless. But when you touch and you poke at the images and resources that someone has that are important for their feeling of being they're like their fortress, they're the things that they feel are important, an important crutch in keeping themselves from feeling helpless, then that person will respond like an animal, often, right? And we all sense this. We're all kind of semi-aware of this, and we understand that it's a minefield when we're talking to other people, and we're trying to be careful not to offend, right? We have a whole culture these days where one of the most powerful, but only socially, only superficially powerful things you can do to manipulate people is to be offended, right? And so now we have a whole culture built on trying to be offended, right? And kind of being right by being more offended than somebody else. That makes us right in our culture these days, and it's horrific. And people use that, to manipulate other people and so forth. But when we understand that this is what's going on in people's minds, including our own, and when we understand how to change the game fundamentally, where we understand, where we redefine and but in a purely correct way, not redefine it just conveniently, where it's BS, but where we understand that power is the power to have more good in our lives. We have some leverage of power to make our lives more good. The power is related to having more goodness rather than protecting against aggression or defeating aggression or gathering resources and what resources can do and getting other people to do what we want. Now, ironically, you're going to have a much easier time getting other people to do what you want and accumulating resources and having a self-image that's going to serve you by taking this path with me, by taking this journey and by flipping the script and changing the game in the way I'm showing you. So ironically, you're going to have all these things better, right? Again, relationships, influence, resources, money, and your self-image will all be more effective and efficient if you don't build them on the foundation of trying to convince yourself you're not helpless, and instead build it on the foundation of understanding you actually are fundamentally not helpless. But you're not all powerful. People try to sell you on, oh, you're so much more powerful than you think. You can and it's always some version of your fortress can be even stronger than you realize. You know, your defenses can be even stronger than you realize. Well, they can be, but not through that route, because when you give up the game to start with, which everyone does by default, then the stronger you build your fortress, the more nervous you are. That like you basically take a step forward and a step back every minute. You get more money, and that's better. That helps you. More money really is helpful. But then people say, oh, well, that comes with its whole set of headaches. Well, it doesn't really need to, right? But when your resources are all a crutch, then you build a better crutch, but then you're more nervous about the crutch, and so forth. And so you can't get ahead, and so it's like this rat race. People get a really nice car, but they can hardly enjoy it because they have this car that makes them feel kind of more powerful and more successful, but then they are more afraid of that car getting hurt, getting scratched, having the leather scratched or something, than if they just drove an inexpensive car, right? Or they hardly drive the car. They keep it in their garage and drive. This is what people do, right? I have a Rolls-Royce Dawn, the new Rolls-Royce. It's unbelievable, right? Let me... I can even show a little picture. Here's about what it looks like. Whoops. Here's a little quick picture. But you can look up a Dawn. Put the screen back. Whoops. Is the screen... Okay, I think we're good. Or, yeah, okay. But when you understand the world properly, you can have a beautiful car and you can just drive it. And you cannot worry about it. You can understand, okay, I'm either not going to buy an expensive car that's fancy if it's going to make me more nervous, or you can have it and just relax and have all the benefits of an inexpensive car because you feel like it's paid for, it's okay, I've already bought it, and then also drive it and also just not be nervous about it. You can have best of both worlds. But when you fundamentally feel helpless, then really people can't do that. And it's just so few people actually just own a Rolls-Royce and drive it and relax and don't worry about it and just can fully enjoy it. This is just a random example, but that's an example of something that I can do just because of what I understand here. And I say that just to kind of motivate you or give you a practical application. When we're so deep all the time, I like to give something tangible. Okay, so that is our first idea, and we'll continue to mix this idea with practical applications and examples and so forth. But let me give you a related idea. Maybe I'll quickly look at the group here. Would you say that procrastination is a defense for a defense? Are you saying I need to overcome my defenses? Interestingly enough, we never need to overcome. I'm not going to answer too many questions right now, but we don't need, even the idea of overcoming, overpowering, what understanding is going to let us do is to dissolve. I talked about this when I talked about fear. My fear video, when I talk about fear and dissolving fear, it's an application of what I'm talking about, or it's a specific instance of the things you can do when you understand this about helplessness. Or I just gave you an application so you didn't have to understand the deeper thing. I just, again, kind of gave you like a module or something I built off of the deeper idea of helplessness or understanding helplessness. But you don't need to overpower things. You can just win. People don't even have a concept hardly of what it means to win. But you can, again, you can literally get rid of these things. Where you don't have to overcome fear, you can understand in any particular instance of fear, as I explained in my video on fear, and it'll dissolve when you work. What happened was your brain got stuck, as I explained, at a certain point, and then it was just like, oh, I'm screwed. All you need to do is work through the scenario past where you were stuck, realize that whatever the object of your fear or the event of your fear would have happened, you would pick yourself up and you would continue and you'd triumph through the situation ideally. And once you realize that, then the fear can be gone. Right? Fear is just your mind getting stuck. So you don't ever need to overcome fear. You instead just it's gone. You dissolve it. I love this. No one talks about this except here. Thank you. Exactly. For your sake, I would like to get to a point, each individual person to get to a point where they stop comparing the things I'm talking about with things that are in books other places. If those things were in books, I would love if you compared it. I would be wonderful. Okay, I'm not trying to compete with anyone. I'm not trying to be superior. I would, again, I talked to you before. I could just retire tomorrow and sip martinis, and I'm fine, and not have to do this if this was already out there. It isn't. And if you believe it is, that's part of the defenses, trying to put things in a box that you already understand. And we're trying to get you outside of the deepest box, the most fundamental thing here, which is, again, that idea that you're not helpless because of your resources and how great you are as yourself, that you're good enough, and that's why you're not helpless. As long as that's the defense. As long as you believe that the reason you're not helpless is because you're strong, in essence, or because you have money, because you're good, you're smart, and all that, because you're already right about a bunch of stuff, as long as that's your way of not feeling helpless, you're screwed. The game is lost, and you're trying to win. A game that you've already given away the ball game when you were an infant, and you never changed the game. And I realized, I guess the talent I had somehow was I was able to carry it through at least and realize that we couldn't win. I realized like decades ago that there's like no way out except there had to be a way out. I had faith that there was a way out rather than having faith that I already knew a way out or that my pastor could already tell me a way out. All these supposed ways out that normal people thought of. Again, I've already excluded Jesus. I think my understanding of Jesus is that Jesus actually was God. And I believe as if Jesus was God. I can't completely prove that Jesus was God. I don't need to. I can at some point show you why I believe as if Jesus was God. You can fully prove that God exists and the basic nature of God. Interestingly enough, neither atheists nor religious people want to confront the idea that God may or may not exist. People that believe in God, that think they believe that it's true that God exists, they don't want to confront the idea that maybe God doesn't exist. It's the same defense against feeling. That's a example of a defense. That defense for the defense is people don't want to genuinely say, well, it's possible that God doesn't exist, and it's possible that God does, unless I figure out the proper method of knowing what's true, and then I use that on the topic of God's existence. Right? You can't know that God exists unless you know how to know what's true, and that has to involve some method that has to be correct. And that method didn't get built by your mind when you were 1 or 0. And then when did it get built afterwards? When you were 2, when you were 3, when you were 12? Did you stop for years? Right? It took me many years to figure it out. Is there a time when you spent many years? Or maybe you're that much smarter than me, which would be great, by the way. That's very possible. I don't know every person. But each and every book I read, the people display a misunderstanding of it, a lack of understanding of any of this. They skip over it all. And they're always operating from this defense against the defense. Is there an actual energy force that authority exerts? to answer that, we'll probably need to build more understanding, but at some point we'll be able to understand the answer to that question. Let me click over here to something Bobby Mitchell posted. This is a really great teachable moment because this is an awesome observation. What this person wrote in this book, U Squared, is terrific, and I appreciate Bobby for sharing it. I'm not picking on anything or anybody. But it also contains an example of the deeper thing that I'm looking to illustrate here. So I'll just read the whole thing. Bobby posted from this, it's an excerpt from this book, like a screenshot, presumably from mobile phone or whatever, of U Squared. You deliberately destabilize yourself when you break out of the habit patterns that represent the status quo, right? When you break out of the box, you deliberately destabilize yourself. You create some inner chaos for yourself. So be prepared for the possibility of confusion, anxiety, and failure. That's part of opening yourself up to a new methodology that has the potential to deliver exponential performance gains. Okay? So often in life, it seems things first get worse on the way toward getting better. Be prepared for that sort of development. Problems belong in the process. They are part of the equation that produces U Squared. They are not proof that your ambitions are futile or that you should give up. As someone has said, everything looks like a failure in the middle. I've said that myself, by the way. Not everything looks like failure, but I said that sometimes things are going to look that way when you're going from like one mountain peak to another, metaphorically. You can't bake a cake without getting the kitchen messy. Halfway through surgery, it looks like there's been a murder in the operating room. If you send a rocket toward the moon, about 90% of the time it's off course. It fails its way to the moon by continually making mistakes and correcting them. Okay, so there's a kind of a deep teachable thing in here. So first of all, that's a very helpful model, and people that are recognizing what is said here are going to be much better off than people that don't recognize it. However, within this correct idea is an even deeper incorrect idea that's being reinforced. And you can spot this over and over again through all sorts of self-improvement books, where people are making correct observations that are helpful for people, but they're reinforcing a deeper misconception without realizing it, or kind of the deepest misconception. The difference that you're going to get with me, and again, I say this to help you because I want you to get what I'm trying to help you with, and the only way for you to do that is to be open to that what I have is different in a unique and deeper way. But I understand, I could say I believe as if, but I actually understand that pretty much all sorts of things in life, most anything in life can be easy if we just understand it properly. So I talk about win, then attack. Most everyone else assumes attack, then keep trying to win. So he's saying that you create some inner chaos for yourself. Be prepared for the possibility of confusion, anxiety, and failure. That is how it is for everybody, yes, but it doesn't have to be that way. Just like people will talk about overcoming fear, but it doesn't have to be the case that you overcome fear. It can be the case that you can dissolve fear if you understand things properly enough. So it doesn't have to be the case that you feel confusion, depending on how we define confusion. But we don't need to feel anxiety, and we certainly don't need to feel or experience failure if we don't set the table in such a way that we can fail. Right? We can have an exit strategy. At some point, we'll stop pursuing a particular goal. Right? There's a cool story with of King David, historical or not, but presumably it was, where he was praying and fasting and everything when his son was deathly ill. But then once his son died, then he stopped that and he had a feast. Not to celebrate his son dying. He didn't want that to happen. But there's no more fast. And people say, well, why aren't you fasting anymore? He said, well, my son's dead. So he dropped the goal, right? So you can have parameters when you start where you drop a goal, and then otherwise you can, within the boundaries that you set, where you'll drop it, then you can go for it relentlessly. And in neither case do you fail. Again, I'm glossing over things fairly quickly. So again, this person's kind of taken for granted that things have to be more difficult than they really have to be. If we understand local peak theory, let me just segue right into local peak theory here. I'm putting this this picture here. There's no perfect picture for this. I've described this elsewhere a bit in recordings, but I want to make sure that I cover it in this series, and it relates to all this. It's very, very important. It's not really theory. It's like an illustration that contains a true set of reasoning, and this applies to your life constantly, and you want to have it at your mental fingertips consistently. So if you were to imagine a mountain range where higher is better, or where higher could be better, or not, but where sometimes higher can be better, or where we can define it so that higher is better sometimes. And let's suppose you can't see. Let's say it's foggy, right? There's a mist over it, so you can't see all that far. You can see several feet or even 100 feet, but you can't see anything like the whole mountain range. Then it's interesting, right? You can climb the mountain you're on, and so let's say then you want to get to a high spot. Then if you start climbing the local peak that you're on, then you're going to make immediate progress, right? And you're going to have feedback that you're getting higher. But what's going to happen is you're going to reach the top of your local peak, and you will not be able to go any higher. In some cases, that might be fine. But in other cases, if you are trying to reach the top, or if you're on a peak, or if you somehow know that you need to get to a certain height, then if you get to your top of your local peak and it's not that height, then you can know you're on the wrong peak. And the only thing you can do is to go looking for another one and try to do the best you can to figure out whether that's the right peak. And as soon as you figure out whether it's the right or wrong peak, then you either climb it if it's right or you find a different one if it's wrong. But the different ways that you can play with this are varied, and but I want to be able to refer to this in the future, and in this webinar as well. And I can't really talk to you very well unless you have this general understanding of local peak, the local peak theory or local peak illustration or local peaks. So you can get stuck on a local peak if you're just climbing it. We can see how this defense of the defense came about is that in order to basically your mind by default climbs you to the top of your local peak that you're on, right? And it's only if something another way to see what happens is that what people do is they'll get to the top of their local peak and they'll say, oh, okay, well, that's my goal anyway. They'll adjust their goals to the mountain peak that they're on and be done with it. And they'll be like, well, I'm successful. They'll redefine success downward. And, you know, what if everyone's not happy? Well, that's okay. I guess that it doesn't matter after all, right? As long as my tribe is happy, right? Whenever people, there's very, very destructive ways, by the way, in which there's just countless, really pretty much all the destructive things people do are based upon the defense, trying to feel powerful and defending against realizing that they're trying to feel powerful by having a crutch. So people will identify with their body, then they'll identify, to feel more powerful, they'll identify with a tribe, which can become incredibly destructive, right? All wars aren't based on religion or politics. They are on the surface, but and people say, oh, it's religion's fault. No, it's not religion that's doing it. It's this, what I'm talking about. It just looks like religion or politics on the surface. What's really going on is people inherently start by feeling powerless. Then they want to build up a crutch or defenses or resources and their tribe and whatever, and have relationships, have money and all that, and land and all that. And they want to feel powerful. Do you feel more powerful if you're associated with a tribe or just yourself, individual, tribe, right? People say, oh, humans are tribal. We don't need to be tribal. We're tribal based. This is an observation based on the wrong starting point. First we lose the game, then people make observations, then people try to climb peaks. All self-improvement out there, well, some of it might just be unhelpful, but there's plenty of it that's helpful in climbing this overall incorrect peak. And since people are stuck on this peak because they don't understand this, then they're way better off with the self-improvement training that helps them to climb the peak that they're on better. And keep in mind that once we have this illustration, we can play with them in different ways. You can imagine there is a mountain peak, but it's divided into a whole bunch of sub-peaks. Right? Can you imagine one big mountain? And remember, there's a mist. You can't see past it. Suppose there's one big mountain that in and of itself has a whole bunch of smaller peaks within that one mountain. And somewhere else there's a higher mountain, but you can't see it. So someone will climb to the top of a local peak within the larger peak. And then a person will come along and say, no, dude, I have the secret to life. I'm in no way picking on any actual training or whatever. I have, whatever. You have all kinds of power, and I have life figured out. I'm so successful. Come, let me show you. And they lead you down this local peak that you're on, and they show you a higher peak, and it's way higher than the one you're on. Self-improvement will do that, and it really will get people on a higher peak. It really will help them, you see. And they'll really contain correct ideas, just like that screenshot there. But it's still, and those correct ideas that are contained, and there's so many good and helpful and correct ideas contained in both self-improvement and any other kind of improvement or learning that you're doing. But those good ideas will still be good when you're on the proper peak. So self-improvement books are actually very beneficial. But let me get you on fundamentally the right mountain peak that people aren't realizing. And that it took me forever, and I was relentless as heck. And as far as I can tell, I have a particular talent for this, or a particular strength with conceptual thinking to figure this out. So let me get you on the right fundamental peak, and then all that stuff is going to be very helpful for you, and all the SEO training, right, is going to be helpful for you, and so forth, even more so. So it's very helpful. Just don't let it, the only drawback is if someone does that process. This is why experts have a harder time. Pastors will have a harder time listening to my proof of God than a layperson. Or professors of philosophy have a harder time with learning my philosophy than a person who's not think of themselves as an expert. Why? Because, or someone who's really into self-improvement and has been helped a lot by it, it can actually get in their way and blind them or occlude them, because when you get someone at that higher peak, now they're higher up, they have, in a sense, less vision or less incentive, or they feel like now it's actually a bigger journey and more down to go down into the valley and get to the peak I'm trying to get you on. It only looks like that. There's no actual valley or suffering or problems, is what I'm saying. That's what I said in the first Alchemy webinar. All we're doing is building something in parallel that's only going to benefit you. But there can be an illusion, right? If I've talked about this in some places where if you're traveling somewhere that you're really excited to go, if it's far away, right? Let's say you're trying to go to Spain, you're really excited about it, and you genuinely are going to be really happy when you get there. Then you can, the whole way that you're traveling there, you can love it and enjoy it. But if you thought that you're going what was half an hour away, but you get stuck in a terrible traffic jam for 8 hours, then you can feel like it was a terrible 8 hours, but then you got to where you're going. But ironically, and let's suppose that place half an hour away, in the one scenario, you're super happy when you get there, and same as when you went to Spain, you're super happy. And so in either case, you're equally happy. But in one case, you knew it was going to take you 8 hours, or obviously Spain's longer than that, whatever it would be, or I guess it depends on where you're traveling from. Maybe if it's a straight flight from New York, then or DC, then it's roughly that, perhaps. Anyway, but if you thought it was going to be 8 hours, then you could enjoy the whole thing. If you didn't realize it, then it can involve a lot of suffering. So by helping you see how all this works, there doesn't have to be any suffering in reorganizing your whole understanding of the world. You'll end up keeping so much, but some ideas will be wrong, and you'll want to discard those. But if you see it as the journey was always going to take a certain amount of time, right? If you could see the whole mountain range, you wouldn't feel like you're making negative progress if you went off the peak that you're on, down into a valley, and over onto the higher peak, right? If you saw it the whole time, if you could understand the whole time, then it would be just a joyous experience, right? It'd be a great journey. And that's what we can do together. So that's local peak, the local peak illustration or theory or whatever. And now you can have that forevermore, and you can play with it in different ways. And that this blurb that Bobby shared, which let me share a whole bunch of things, so it's beautiful. I'm glad he shared it. Can be understood in light of the local peak understanding, including that it doesn't ever have to be a problem when you see life in this way. And whenever people are talking about this local peak illustration, it encompasses all this get out of your box, even believing the impossible, the benefit to all this stuff is anything to get you on a better peak, right? Sometimes in life, you don't need to be on the highest peak. When it comes to like getting married or starting to rank a website, right? You don't have to know everything about it to just get going. One of the beautiful things to understand in life is that taking action is one of the things that leads to increasing understanding. Remember what I said. You can have two reactions. What you want to do is get to the point in life where, think about it. Imagine if no matter what feedback you got from the world, you could deal with it in a positive way, that you didn't have to be afraid of feedback. One of the things I realized that where we were giving away the game before we started, where we were starting by losing and then trying to win, is if we're afraid of some feedback in life, which people are terrified of lots of feedback, and I understand that. I've lived through it. I mean, and there's still things I haven't totally fixed, where there's things I don't want to hear, or or whatever. But by understanding this, when they come up, I realize it's a signal, and then I understand how to fix that error in my mind. So whatever feedback, because you can respond to all feedback in life with either appreciation and gratitude. So you can experience lots of appreciation and gratitude throughout the day. That's what I do. Or curiosity. How do I there's this bad symptom, that means somewhere at the root there's a contradiction, something's wrong. Any bad, there's always a contradiction at the root of it, each and every time, 100%. Right? All the political strife that we have in America and other places, it's all rooted in a contradiction. And instead, people don't see it that way, and they don't have any kind of, they just completely don't see it that way. Actually, was planning on mentioning that the contradiction might end up open up a little ball of wax, but it might also be fairly eye-opening. Oh, the Milgram study. Oh, cool. Thanks, Mike. I need to look up that study and get the exact details. Okay, what I want to do is make sure I cover that that extra thing, this idea of arbitrary. So I've given you this local peak idea to start to have at your fingertips, and I want you to have an understanding of the word arbitrary. Oh, and this is going to fulfill my promise of something I was going to give you on this webinar, or start giving you, to give you a very different ability to influence your mind, and it's not going to be by overcoming. Remember, overcoming kind of carries the implication of you start not knowing whether you're going to win, and then you struggle, and then you overcome. I don't like to do things that way. I want to show you how to win first by dissolving any opposition, and then you just reach out and get it. You just win. Easy. When we talk about taking action, when I take action, I'm either doing it to ask the right questions or increase my understanding, or if it's just the fruit that I was going for in the first place, it's just so easy and obvious, then I just reach out and take it, whatever that result is. You can see this in the context of relationships, right? Obviously, if you have a good enough relationship that you've built, then having intimacy with a person is as easy as just saying, hey, do you want to hop into bed, or do you want to go on a date, or whatever, right? Or do you want to sit on the couch, or whatever it might be, or kiss me, whatever. So it's not like, oh, how do I take action and get what I want? You just reach and get it. It's the easiest thing in the world if you've built the context for it, right? And you just keep on building the context. We can call it the foundation, the roots, the context, whatever, until it's the easiest thing in the world to just pick the fruit that you're going for. That's how I do things. Okay. So arbitrary. Arbitrary should be a word that also, and a concept that's at your fingertips. It's incredibly relevant and important all the time. And it's going to let you, see, we understand on some level that we're a bit at the mercy of our own mind, right? We kind of understand on some level that we're afraid of how we ourselves are going to feel about a certain event or a certain piece of news or a certain supposed failure, right? Or if we don't have enough money, or whatever it might be, or we're hoping to lose weight or maintain our weight or maintain our energy level, but we feel like we want a particular food or something like that. All sorts of things. And then, but we feel like, oh man, but I want it, and we're always confused And people are always having these conversations with each other like, oh, do I listen to myself, or we're always kind of trying to explore whether they're right, or try to reinforce, of course, our self-images about being right. So we're often really stuck also between wanting to feel like we're right and strong, but also being afraid of how our mind is going to make us feel and all that. Or we're just trying to get up in the morning or get ourselves to do a task. And we feel like we definitely want to accomplish a task and want the rewards of it, but then we somehow just doesn't seem to be happening. We don't seem to be doing it, and then we think we have a motivation problem or whatever. So, so this idea of arbitrary is going to be nuts, and as this gets integrated more, and we develop it together, it's going to really change how you understand the world and understand other people too. It's going to really help you also to do sales and conversion in a big way. This word is kind of unique. I need to use this word because there's nothing else that really has this meaning that I can think of. There's a word that we use where there's a reason. What's the reason you did that? What's the reason for this? Or what's the reason for that? But we use that word, reason. We use that word in kind of an inherently contradictory way. Normally things are what arbitrary means this. Arbitrary is a little bit different than random. If you roll a die, then the number that came up we could say is random. But if you pick a number, if someone says pick a number at random, in a sense you pick a number not quite at random, but maybe like arbitrarily, where, let's suppose you say, well, I pick the 20, this isn't my actual birthday, but the 29, like if someone says pick a number between 1 and 100, say I pick 29 because it's my birthday, the day of my month of my birthday, then that number isn't totally random. It had a reason because it's the number of your birthday, but that reason itself isn't grounded in anything, right? It doesn't right, like you pick the day of the month of your birthday, but there was no reason to pick the day of your month of your birthday, right? But you had to pick something, so there's nothing wrong with doing that, but that pick then is arbitrary. And when you see this, it's unbelievable. This is almost is going to be as much of a red pill, blue pill thing as the defense and the helplessness, and they relate. Your whole understanding of the world and your beliefs are constantly going to be seen when you look at them. They're going to be, and your feelings that you feel like are based on a reason, they're constantly arbitrary, meaning you'll have all these reasons for things. But if you continue it forward and you look, well, what's the reason for the reason? There might even be a reason for the reason, but it's going to terminate at nothing. Just like when the idea of picking a number between 1 and 100, and you say, well, I picked 29 because it's my birthday, day of the month. Well, why'd you do that? No reason, right? I'm going to use the following example because I've debated using it, and there's more examples that I'll give than just this, but it should be eye-opening because you probably make this mistake, and you can see everyone else around you making this mistake, and the impact in the world is astronomical and negative. A little bit of a risk for me sharing this, but again, what do? Do we fall asleep, or do I do something that kind of hits home, right? I want the energy of hitting hard with something. So people have, our whole society is based on the idea that there is potentially such a thing as a legitimate government. And we bank so much on this. You wouldn't believe how much we bank on this, all right? When I point out that taxation is extortion, in one sense people are like, oh, sure, yeah. But in another sense, it doesn't really matter to people. Because why? Because there's a second idea. It doesn't matter if taxation is extortion because people say, well, but when the government does it, that makes it legitimate to some degree. Maybe it then becomes a little bit illegitimate if that money is used in a corrupt way. So people feel upset about corruption in government. They feel like corruption delegitimizes government. But corruption could only exist. The very fact that people believe that corruption can exist in government proves that people believe that government can be legitimate in the first place. Because you can't corrupt something unless there's a something. The only thing that you could corrupt in government would be legitimacy. So in order to believe in corruption, you have to believe in the legitimacy of government. And yet, there literally cannot be such thing as a legitimate government. Government, inherently, the idea, not government, but the idea of legitimacy of government is literally, it's arbitrary. So if a policeman performs any action, the only reason why it's supposed to be different than if a non-policeman does, right? That's why you're not supposed to impersonate a police officer. They say like, well, that's okay because they're a policeman, right? That's their job, or it's legitimate because they're a policeman. Or take jury duty. Jury duty consists of basically enslaving people, right? It happened to me a year ago. And if I were to perform it on a stranger, meaning if I were to write them a letter and say, you either show up at my house and do anything I tell you to do, and I'll give you a call every day for 2 weeks and let you know if you're going to show up at my house or not, and you better do that, or else I'm going to really come after you. I'm going to come after you specifically. I'm going to lock you maybe in my basement or something like that. That's clearly wrong, right, if I were to do that to someone. So, but people tend to believe that jury duty is okay. The only reason it could be okay is if there's something about government that takes things that are clearly not okay and makes it okay, right? That literally that's what people believe has to be the case of government, is that government takes things that are obviously wrong, like extortion all by itself. One stranger doing it to another is obviously wrong. Pretty much everyone, or if there's any exceptions, I mean, it'd be extremely rare. It'd be kind of weird, right? Extortion is like if I go over to my neighbor and I say, you give me $500,000 in the next month, or I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to take that 500 with interest, and I'm going to hurt you and your family badly. Obviously, that's wrong, right? So in a vacuum, extortion is wrong. But people believe that it's okay. The only reason they can believe it's okay is if government does something to change the situation, right? And that's what I mean by legitimacy, right? So our whole society is built on the idea that there's something about government that can take an action that's clearly immoral and really seriously immoral, right? Like enslaving someone, jury duty in a vacuum, all by itself, if one stranger was doing it to another, it's slavery. It's not nearly the same degree of slavery as some other instances of slavery that happen now and that have happened in the past, that are way higher in degree. I'm not equating the degree, but if I were to perform jury duty on it, if I were to force another stranger into jury duty, not as a government, but just as myself, as a private citizen, then clearly it would be not just illegal, but immoral, right? It would be the kind of thing that it would be legitimate if they defended themselves against. So there's all sorts of things where, or when 6 police in New York, right, they strangled, wasn't Freddie Gray, that was a different time when they tortured Freddie Gray to death, but they killed a guy in New York City who was selling loose cigarettes, right? 6 guys attacked him and he died, right? Either had some kind of respiratory attack or whatever. But normally, outside of government, that would be felony murder, right? You're not allowed to just attack somebody, and if you do and they die as a result of it, then you performed a felony and assault in the first place, and then that would be felony murder. But the idea in many people's minds is that it's okay because the government did. So we all have to believe, not we all, but virtually all of us are, again, even if we believe in the idea of corruption, it means we believe in this idea of legitimacy of government, including if you have a Christian church and they allow, like a policeman, into their church, they must believe in the magical ability of government to take something that's clearly immoral and make it moral, right? Because if we had just a non-policeman who performed the actions of a policeman, right, walked up to people with a gun, threatened them with a gun, and so forth, right and left over various things, including not paying money because they own a house, right? Like the property tax is the main thing. So if you had a person who enforced extortion, an extortion enforcer, and nothing was legitimizing it, and they walked into a church and they advertised, that's what I do. I just walk up to people and I threaten great harm against them unless they pay me lots of money. Then presumably you'd expect the church to challenge them on that. Or you'd say, well, this church is weird, right? This is a bizarre church. This church is I wouldn't want to worship here because they seem to have no morality whatsoever. If they're not going to challenge a guy who just threatens their neighbors with harm unless they give them hundreds of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars, then something's off, right? So, but real policemen are allowed to go into a church unchallenged typically. So that could only be if, based on the idea of legitimacy of government, that something that's inherently immoral is made moral by government. And government is an example of something arbitrary, this step from immorality to morality. There's a reason given for it. But then the question is, if you continue the chain, where does it terminate? Does it terminate in somewhere solid, or does it terminate nowhere, and there ends up being no reason for the reason? And if you were to carry that forward with government, you end up with no reason for the reason. And sometimes people say something like, well, you need roads. But that no one really affirms that the desire for a road makes any and all evil. Okay, if I said, well, let's harvest children for their organs, sell that, and for the money of that, let's build roads. And just to be safe, let's sacrifice a few children on altars and appease the gods because we don't want the gods to interfere with the road building. Then the same person who tells me we need taxes for roads would say, oh, no. The desire for roads doesn't justify child sacrifice. Well, if the desire for roads justifies some, extortion is still a major thing. It's not like a tiny thing, right? Like threatening to greatly harm someone unless they give you $500,000 is not like a trivial property rights violation. So if someone said, well, what about roads? They would have to continue that statement and explain what it is about roads that make some things moral and some things immoral, or why blanket makes everything okay. If we want some roads, then if we sacrifice children, take their organs, sell them on the black market, and put 1% of that money towards roads and pocket the other 99%, is that okay? People would say, presumably, no, that's not okay. So the desire for roads in and of itself and paying 1% of our money for roads, that doesn't automatically justify any and all evil. So it's not actually a reason. So then we, and I could go on, but if you carry it through for yourself, you'll find that there's no reason. You can also do a mental experiment. Let's say we're on an island, and there's 10 of us on an island. And you go to bed one day, and you wake up, and 2 of them say, hey, guess what? We formed a government, and we're gonna try to send a rocket to the moon. And because we think that'll help. That'll be good. And so you need to give us some of your coconuts. Right? Is that legitimate? Right? They gave a reason, but the reason was arbitrary. The reason was we want to send a rocket to the moon. But you say, well, I get, and they're like, well, we have a reason. Give us your coconuts, or we're going to hurt you, and we're going to take even more coconuts and hurt you if you don't give it to us because we want to send a rocket to the moon. You have a social contract with us. If you don't like it, move. You say, I didn't sign any contract, right? And again, they're like, we have a reason, yeah, but the reason's arbitrary. What's the reason for the reason? Well, we want to send a rocket to the moon. They're not going to be able to give a reason that's foundational in any way, right? And the burden's on you. If you're trying to magically change something immoral, forcing people to give you their coconuts, and magically make it where it's okay, the burden's on you to show how something's foundational. And any angle you look, any way you look at that with government, it terminates nowhere. There's no actual ability. There's no contract that I signed or really anyone signed. If someone does voluntarily sign a contract, then that could be a different story. If they're not coerced, if it's, there's rules for contracts that are not by law only, but by logic, but by basic morality, right? We need to be able to contract with each other in order to trade and interact with each other. That's fine and good. We make a contract that's not fraudulent. It's now the fulfillment of that contract is like the other person's property, right? If I say you give me $1,000 and I'll work on your roof for 8 hours, or I'll paint your house for 8 hours, then me painting their house for 8 hours is now their property. If I withhold that, I'm violating their property. But if someone just walks up to me with a gun and says you better paint my house for 8 hours and there's no contract, then of course now that's slavery, right? Once we realize that that government can't legitimize immoral acts, that there's no actual such a thing as legitimate government, then we can build an understanding of public policy that's correct. Unfortunately, all of our current thinking about government, by no matter what side or in this last election, there's like 5 sides. There's like Bernie Sanders people, Clinton type people, Trump, Cruz, and like Bush, Rubio, Kasich type people at least, and then there's more, right? Each and every one of those, except for a certain strain of libertarianism, and even then, you almost can never find someone that says exactly what I'm saying. you have to start with understanding that government can't legitimize anything that's immoral inherently. That anything that someone does in the name of government needs to be legitimate for one stranger to do to another stranger, literally. And anyone that is doing anything that's immoral and they're justifying it by government, that thing is actually just fully immoral, fully, as if they're doing it to a stranger. So that's a shocking thing, right? But it shows how powerful all our minds need by default is an arbitrary reason, and it feels real. Especially if it's, again, triangulated, because this is how our brain operates. Our brain starts at infancy by being like a lawyer, not a scientist or a philosopher, trying to convince us and itself that we're on the right mountain peak. Once it has, people say, oh no, I think for myself, or I don't just believe what my pastor says, or I don't just believe what this guy says or that guy says. No, you don't just believe what one person says, but once it gets triangulated for you, once you have like 3 different experiences with it roughly, one source feels right to you, then you try it and it works, it seems to work, you get the result you're hoping for, boom. Now it feels real. But 3 things, each of which is not foundational, leads to nothing, right? 3 legs of a stool, all of which are not on the ground, are not going to hold up a stool. But your brain is totally satisfied with reasons that are inherently arbitrary, especially if there's a few of them, okay? Or an experience, you heard it from an authority figure, and so forth. And it can be one thing if it's you're isolated and so forth. But even then, when isolating means, like with this milligram experiment, I can give you an example with hypnosis. If you hypnotize someone, they won't do something that's presented in a way that they wouldn't normally do. If you just hypnotize a girl and said, okay, take your clothes off and jump into bed with me, they wouldn't do that. But if you hypnotize someone, what happens is they get in a state of being hyper-focused where they don't really look outside of the scenario that you're painting. So if you actually paint a scenario that triangulates to where the conclusion that they themselves reach is they should take off their clothes, like it's a hot day, you're on the beach, no one's around, or you're just with someone that you really like and you feel comfortable with, then they could take off their clothes. You just triangulate. So your whole sense of reality is triangulated rather than foundational. The beautiful thing is that's your mind, that's not you, and you're trying to actually deal with your mind. You're trying to you might be trying to overcome or control your mind. Actually, it's not control or overcoming that you need. You want to dissolve opposition. You want to be able to create what you want, theoretically. First in your mind, you can create what you really want. And then you don't want resistance from your mind. Isn't that right? What if you could imagine what you want, and then your mind would hop on board and help you with it? That doesn't mean you'd get everything that you're hoping to make manifest in the world, but boy, you'd get far, right? You create what you really want, you imagine what you really want, and then if your mind is fully on board without, you know how with muscles, if you hypnotize someone, they can lift much more because muscles actually, some amount of your muscle fibers actually literally work in opposition of where you think that they're working, and it greatly saps you of effective strength. Same thing, it's not exactly identical, but something very metaphorical enough happens with your mind, where your mind's always basically part of it's fighting you. Or maybe not always, but plenty of the time. And you're always having to worry about that. So the defense against the defense of helplessness will be screaming and trying to help you defend against what I'm saying right now. It's like, oh, no, 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 no. Your mind's not all, your whole model for the world isn't arbitrary. But if you can get through that illusionary wall, and despite the defense against the defense, realize if you're not your mind, and if you're not helpless, you have power to make more good, that power starts with creating in your mind. Creating that happens first in your mind, so to speak. Then you can use your power, you can create, and then you get your mind on board. You can dissolve your own mind's resistance with the following trick. So it's not even a trick. With the following correct understanding, all the resistance from your mind, just like fear. I was able to tell people all fear is arbitrary. All of your fear is arbitrary. And if it's not, if there's a real reason inside of the fear. Again, you don't need to feel the fear. You can just understand, okay, that's not a good strategy. I don't want to jump off that cliff. I don't need to be afraid of falling off a cliff. I just need to understand it's not going to take me where I want to go, right? So you don't have to feel afraid of it. You don't not jump off a cliff because you're afraid. I don't not walk up and punch somebody because I'm afraid of the consequences. It's just not going to get me where I want to go. I want other people to be happy. I want myself to be happy. Punching someone isn't going to do it. Or stealing from someone's not going to do it. Or pirating someone's not going to do it, right? So I don't do it. I don't need to be afraid of the consequences. I don't need to be afraid of it. So you don't need to feel fear. All the fear is arbitrary. There might be something within it that you actually don't want to do. That's bad strategy. But how do you figure that out? By carrying through the scenario and thinking it through. So everything that your brain is telling you, it's all arbitrary. At the end of the fear video, I talked about the magic blanket technique, and once you catch your brain being irrational, I said, it's great, all bets are off, right? You can just come up with something irrational in your favor, and your brain can't fight it because you realize it's irrational. I'm getting more specific with that idea. It's unbelievably wonderful to realize that you can do this. If there's a good reason behind something, great, you'll discover it. When I say it's arbitrary for now. If you carry things forward and there really is a good reason that's foundational, that makes sense, where the opposite of it clearly is wrong, the opposite of the correct idea is clearly wrong, and you recognize that, then great, you figured out something real and you're like, great, I know that now. I'll do things that way. I'll always take that into account. I know that. And then otherwise, you come and you see there's nothing at the bottom of it, nothing beneath it. So you stop doing it. When you realize there's nothing justifying extortion, we would stop extorting, and it looks like we're going through a valley. People, oh my gosh, how are we going to have roads? Right? There's a humorous meme it's a picture of let me see if I can get it here real quick. Here, this is might be kind of small, but it's a let me probably. It's a path in the woods, like a trail, and it says proof that deer have formed a government, right? It's a joke. Like there's a road, oh my gosh, there must be a government. You'll find the better peak. If you reject a peak that has to be wrong, I'm telling you, you will always find a better peak. You don't need to worry ever in life. The world is rigged for good, okay? Just put this on so it doesn't distract me for a moment. The world is rigged for good. It's all right. And I'll develop all this more and prove it better. But if we drop things that are clearly wrong, we're only going to be better off. There's not going to be some kind of problem. There might be a valley that if we don't see the whole mountain range, it looks like a valley. If we saw it all properly, we would understand that we're just heading wonderfully straight to where we're trying to get to. But if you're having trouble getting up or feeling motivated or whatever, carry through. Imagine you go and do the task. And then how are you going to feel? And then imagine if you don't do the task, how are things going to play out? It's going to be pretty obvious that all the reasons for not doing the task are not going to make any sense. Now, the hidden thing, the reason your brain wants to protect you from looking at the reason beneath the reason is what? The defense against the defense. Your brain is trying to protect you from realizing that you're assuming that you're helpless, that everything's based on the idea that you're helpless in your understanding of the world. It's trying to protect you, so it constantly has you embrace blurriness. Blurriness feels like it's right, and understanding feels like it's dangerous and wrong and scary and a necessary evil. When you try to understand things, your brain rebels because it's afraid. But it's not a person who's doing this on purpose. It's just a mechanism, like a car going in a particular direction by inertia. So your brain is, again, it's just a mechanism doing this. Don't worry about it. Again, it's arbitrary. It's doing it for a reason, but the reason has no good reason. The reason is to protect you from realizing you're helpless, but you're not helpless. So the reason is not only arbitrary, but it's wrong. It's dead wrong. It's trying to protect you from being aware of something, but you can be aware that you're not helpless directly. You don't have to have blurriness. You don't have to shy away and be scared of understanding and always have some excuse. How does your brain do it? Does your brain tell you, don't understand? You don't want to know what's really going on in the world. You don't want to know what's true. It doesn't put it that way, does it? It just says, oh, look, let's go out with your family. Oh, you have a headache. Oh, you're tired. Oh, it's too much of a hassle, right? Oh, you got to take action. It just presents you with better alternatives, supposedly, than seeking understanding. But why? It's trying to protect this foundational understanding of helplessness. If you can just go directly, as I explained to you about, you have to have power to make things more good, or else everything has no meaning. Everything's ridiculous. There's no reason to do anything. Just stare at the wall. You can't act on the opposite of it. So it must be the case that you do have power. The more you understand that power, fundamentally, what's LOI about? Why can't I tell people right off the bat what LOI is about, law of implication, and what alchemy is about? Alchemy is the idea of mixing concepts and unmixing them and seeing what they're made of. Law of implication is about we have power that cannot be stopped. Nobody can stop you ever. You will always have that power no matter what. You have power. You are not powerless. Now let's understand the nature of that power. To do that, let's understand who we are. Let's understand things that must be related to it. Goals, our mind, faith, right? Foundational, arbitrary, reason, all these concepts, right? Mind. These must all be related to the nature of our power. Let's understand the true nature of our power. You couldn't do it before because there was always something presented as more important, more interesting, more necessary than seeking understanding. Why? To protect you from realizing that you are helpless, but you're not. It's all a house of cards based on a false idea. Confront it directly, and together we can continue to explore it. That's what this is about. What's your power, your real power? We don't need, it's not about the false idea of power, the substitute idea of power that everyone else is talking about building up your resources and your fortress better while assuming you're helpless. I will also help you to build your resources, your power, your relationships, your fortress, and all that better. So will they. Other books will help you, but they will help you better and more properly with what I'm doing for you. I develop lots of that stuff myself as well. But then people take a look at it and think those are the golden nuggets. All right? I don't want you to take those golden nuggets, so to speak, of more surface ways to increase your relationships, your power, your money. Yeah, I know a whole bunch of those things myself. Some I've discovered, some I've read and filtered, so I know which one's right and which one isn't, right? But taking that and missing the greater point that I'm covering directly here is horribly tragic, and I don't want that for you. And that's why I'm coming out. That's why I'm taking a risk and talking a little bit about things like government and so forth. Because it's other people shy away from that stuff, right? Almost completely when it comes to self-improvement and so forth. They want to please everyone. I want to please everyone too, but we got to get underneath it all. So that is great. That kind of brings things to a decent stopping point for now. And I will go back to the phones for a little while, and then we will wrap things up. The no fear. That's great. Oh, did Mike put it on YouTube, I think? Excellent. Hell yes, David, be open to receive. Great. If we are working from the premise that we want maximum happiness for yourself and everyone else, then you come to the conclusion that having, by the way, I pointed this out one other place, I can't remember where, but people that have a belief that if you have the proper relationship with God, then you'll go to heaven, and then some other people won't. If you have that belief and think that through, you're then believing that you're helpless once you get to heaven. I'm not advocating for that belief or discussing it one way or the other. I don't really know specifically exactly what the truth is specifically with that. There's all kinds of nuances that can go different ways. But think about that. Don't assume you're helpless ever. If part of your belief is you get to heaven and then we're done, and some people are not in heaven, then think about it. Think it through and think, what the heck are you going to do in heaven? You got to be working to get the other people in there as well. And if you assume that you can't do anything once you're there, that doesn't make any sense. Then you're assuming that you're helpless. I don't ever assume that I'm helpless. If I'm conscious, then I have power to make things more good. And unless I know the ceiling, then I'm relentless. I'm still going. All right? Okay. If we're working for the premise we want maximum happiness for yourself and everyone else, then you come to the conclusion that having a successful business is something that would maximize that for you. How do you start working through blocks such as procrastination? For example, you identify a task is good for getting towards that goal. Oh, and by the way, I did this 45 minutes ago, so I touched on a little bit of this already. And he probably knows that, but I'm still, but for whatever reason you don't feel like doing it or you procrastinate on it because that part doesn't seem enjoyable. So as an example, that would be preparing parts of your taxes because you find it incredibly boring but have to do it anyway. It feels like when doing things I don't particularly enjoy but are important to work, it's more of a force of will. Is there anything to essentially have less resistance to it? A couple things. Now, one is that one of the things that is truly difficult in a way that I don't fully understand is the violence that people do towards us, right? Government, evil violence from policemen and federal agents and lawmakers and all the people that uphold and enforce government. A government based on slavery and extortion that we have in America and every other place that I'm aware of, not specifically picking on America. I acknowledge that I'd rather live in America than some other place in the world for sure. And maybe there's some places that would be better to live. I have no idea. Well, I'm not one of these people that like hates America specifically or anything like that. But there's people violent, right? All government workers and enforcers and that type of thing are horrifically violent towards us and take our stuff. And they believe it's okay. Then we, of course, have the excuse that they have, which is people that are not, excuse me, not part of government, and they're just individuals that steal, and they team up with some other individuals, they act solo, and in various ways they steal, commit fraud, and so forth. And that's tough, and I want that to change, of course. That's the one benefit that I could still have in life is that people do that less, right? It's the only real stumbling block that could exist in my life is people could just be violent and take stuff from me, and I can't defend against that adequately. I don't even, of course, I'll try within reason, right? It's kind of a cost-benefit type of thing, but the idea you lose, the game is lost before you start. If you try to make it so there's no way that people can get to you, you're totally impregnable to those. That being said, now, interestingly enough, there is a way out. My only way that I can think of to actually get out of that and remove that from the world is through spreading law of implication. You can't really kill enough people. What do? Kill all government enforcers and all teachers and school administrators and lawmakers and people upholding that and people that vote for government and all that. I mean, it's just, where does the carnage end, right? So you can't, and then you try to kill all criminals, and then the problem is we have limited knowledge in terms of actual stuff. It's a tough thing, right? Even separate from government, someone steals something from you, then you have a dilemma. You need to figure out who stole it from you, or if someone commits murder, who did it. Anyway, the trying to just fight directly, again, on a cost-benefit basis, there's times for it. Just like there's times for you want to have some web security, you want to have some security in your house, but you can't win the game that way. All you can do is kind of tread water that way. A little bit how I look at money in general. Like you get your stable base because I don't know of any other way, but it's to tread water while you're getting the right foundation for yourself, and you build up from there. But the way to win, the way to make everything right, is by having people understand underneath all of their existing perspectives, getting beneath all their beliefs and everything in what we're talking about here. It's the only way I can see to win. I developed this way to win, looking for the way to win and looking for it for like a long time. I think I have enough understanding now where it might be, I mean, I'm on the attack at this point. We'll see. We'll see. But even as I'm on the attack, I'm also curious, and I learn by doing, and I'm not sitting here, oh, I need to have this webinar be successful necessarily. If it's not, I'm sorry, there's not really a sense of exactly what success or failure means, but I'm not, however it happens, I learn from it. I appreciate the good that comes out of it, and I'm curious and how it can, do things even better. That's a little bit besides the point, but when you mention taxes and stuff, it's one of the toughest puzzles for me. But at some point, you accept that the world is the way it is. We can fight it. Probably the most effective way to fight it, again, is a double thing, is we do on a cost-benefit basis. We deal with it as best we can, protect ourselves as well, in a way that until the cost exceeds the return, right? At some point, your home security is so costly, you can have armed guards walking around and snipers. At some point, the cost exceeds the benefit, presumably, right? It's a little bit of a gray area, but at some point, it obviously exceeds it. Same thing with fighting government, right? At some point, you just can't fight them all. And so you kind of accept it as that's the way the world is. And if I'm gonna, between here and there, between where I'm going, it's the only path. And you can, as I said, you procrastinating is basically your mind getting stuck, metaphorical to fear. Once your mind can see that this is the path to get to where I'm trying to get to, and then you play out the other path in which you procrastinate. Now, sometimes waiting actually will only make things better. right? The only time is on your side. Things can only get easier. There's plenty of examples. Nothing's immediately coming to mind, but or like early 2013. I wasn't in a mad rush to do our next launch for OMG. We just done our first launch of a $150 product and then sold our first version of our coaching for No Holds Barred. We didn't have a plan to get more leads right at that moment, and so things were kind of a holding pattern. But time was on my side. The people in our program were getting more knowledge, more were becoming successful. We were learning more about fulfilling our product. Greg was developing, research and developing. We were developing relationships and networking. And there's a whole bunch of other things I'm not taking up. But then sometimes another thing is it's very easy to feel lazy by accident because you're conflating. That means incorrectly putting two things in a bucket that don't necessarily belong in the same bucket or in the same category. Conflating things you want to do with things that other people want you to do. I realized one day eventually that all my supposed laziness was just not doing basically what my mother thought I should do or someone else like that, or my mother's voice in my head, right? I could be 30, and I'm not picking on my mom. It's just an inherent nature of the, relationship, child-parent relationship. So my mom, I had a fine mom. I have a fine mom. And any mother that raises a kid and they're breathing at 18 deserves a immense amount of appreciation, no matter how good a job they did, right? Because whatever they did was a massive sacrifice. But so also distinguish, and because what can happen is you can take on an identity that you procrastinate, that you're lazy. Once you separate out things where it's actually time is on your side and it's okay to wait, and you have something else that genuinely is more important to do, and also things that are just beliefs that you feel like you should do, but they really came from an outside source. They're arbitrary. It doesn't matter if it came from your parent. If you look, well, why do I want to accomplish this thing that I'm supposedly lazy for not doing? And if you think it through and you realize, oh, okay, I do want that benefit, then you can think through the difference between the cost of doing it and the cost of not doing it and the benefit of doing it. And then you might just feel, all right, let's go do it. Or you might realize, oh, it doesn't make a big difference. When I was in my early 20s, I recognized that people would, I made a lot less money than a lot of other people. I was an entrepreneur. I had my course on accelerated learning. I didn't have to work very much. I just worked for a short season during the year. And then there wasn't a lot else I was doing in terms of making money, but I was working on this stuff. And people that maybe I made $10,000 in a year, people might make 50, but then they would just spend it or even be going to debt. So they would work, spend that money in entertainment, essentially, what amounts to entertainment, and then I would live within my means. I wasn't in debt, and maybe you could say they were building their resume better than me, but it turned out that I was building a great foundation in all kinds of ways. Right, I ended up being a millionaire at the age of 40, multimillionaire at the age of 41, essentially 41 or 42, depending on how you measure it. So keep that in mind, that a lot of laziness isn't really laziness, it's just arbitrary. And then otherwise, if there's a real good thing, then you can see it. Preparing for taxes, I wish they would just tell us a freaking amount. It's bad enough that it's this horrible extortion for massive amounts of money that goes towards laughable, doesn't even go towards anything. The money just gets sent to rich, politically connected people in Egypt. And so people say you need to build roads. Well, it's not going to roads mostly. It's going to politically connected people, right? Or all kinds of schemes as excuses. Or solar power companies that then declare bankruptcy, but the people that set it up are multimillionaires after the bankruptcy. But then they make you figure out the darn stuff, and it's indecipherable and impossible to figure out to begin with. But also the world is the way it is. We have to accept it, and we're always trying to move forward from where we're at and make things as good as possible from where we're at. So if there's a path where we're trying to go that involves doing things for business, and you did distinguish that it's a goal for business and you're procrastinating. Pretty much it's blurriness in your mind. The place that blurriness, again, is the incentive for blurriness, for being okay with not thinking things through, is coming from that defense against helplessness. You get rid of that, it's like a house of cards or dominoes. It's unbelievable. And God, it took me forever to figure what the heck is it that's blocking people and blocking them and blocking them. Like no matter what I would say, people would squirm out of what I was really trying to show people. But I think now that I'm naming it more specifically, I think we'll make a different type of progress. Plus, I'm just going to sit there with you guys week after week and then twice a week and whatever we need to do. And if it happens sooner than that and I'm just repeating myself for the last couple of months, great. If we succeed, then the difference is so astronomical that that's great. If it happens sooner rather than later, then that's no problem. Well, that's interesting. Don't know a whole lot about that. But great. I might take a look into that more. I have looked into, I have a bit of knowledge of quantum physics, but nothing to discuss now. I feel as though most of my life I was reluctant to climb because I always questioned if I was on the right mountain. Thanks for helping me understand this better. Excellent. Oh, let me point out to you that, again, I referenced this, and I'll develop this more in the future, but just to give you enough for this week, there's an awesome concept called stipulation, where you can stipulate that you're on the right peak, so to speak, that it's okay to go build this right website, right? And say, and when you stipulate, you're acknowledging, I'm going to act as if I'm on the right peak. You can also, along with stipulating that, you can say, here's the signal, here's how I would know, here's the boundary where I'll stop stipulating that. Someone's clearly getting hurt. Or well, I've exceeded this amount of resources. Or, like you could specify. And then at that point you can re-examine your stipulation or whatever. But it's totally good and healthy and necessary to stipulate. It's radically different than assuming. With assuming, it's like stipulation, but you're hiding it. You're trying to pretend like you're not. It's like an inherent contradiction. You know and you don't know at the same time. With stipulating, you're saying, I don't know. I'm going to act as if I know, which is totally, again, it's not only reasonable, but necessary and exactly how you want to deal with things is stipulating rather than assuming. And then you don't have to worry about whether it's true or not. You've stipulated that it's true. You're going to act on whether it's true until and unless certain red flags come up or a certain amount of time passes or you spend a certain amount of resources. And then you can totally go for it without any self-deception necessary. And then you don't have to worry about feedback because you've already defined the feedback when you start. You define the boundaries. If the feedback is within your boundaries, no problem. And if you're scared of it or worry about it, feedback ultimately, if you don't have the arbitrary emotion that messes you up with it, it's going to be either helpful or irrelevant, right? Things like procrastination, impatience, and so forth are still on my list of things I want to deal with. Of course, we're going to be spending a lot more time together over the coming weeks, so I can't cover everything in one day. Then you have no reason to come back the next month. Of course, for all of our sakes, if I can cover everything in 1 hour, I would, but small business death note, yeah. Kyle, I'm not sure what you're referencing. Can we collectively possibly determine chance? Some of these I might have to come back to. I'm going to continue to read through just, people's comments. Is David, me, a libertarian? There's various strains of libertarianism. Yes, there's kind of one strain of libertarianism is very close to what I am. I basically understand that we want to uphold property rights for individuals. There's gray areas within that, but that in and of itself is not a gray area. Right, and Neil Gregory assumes. But then the ripple effect of realizing there can't be such a thing as a magic wand that a government person has that makes something immoral into being moral is unbelievable. And it really can yeah, I don't know, it's really some kind of logical ripple effect. How do we maximize executing on our best choice in any given moment? Well, what I talked about last time, it is a little bit of a general answer, but the more we build our understanding of meta strategies and the foundation of life in general, then the more context we have. You see, at any one moment, we only have so much focus, right, consciously, and then separately, our brain is like a mechanism that only has so much capacity which it says it has a lot of the problem with our brain is when it's kind of fighting itself. But because we only have so much conscious focus, this is actually something I want to take a whole lesson on. We need to find good shortcuts, useful shortcuts. The more things we can cut off correctly, the better, right? The more we can narrow our focus in a way that's correct, the better. So the more that you build, like we're doing in this whole alchemy series, the more things you build that you know for certain and that are also pervasive, that come up all the time. This idea of arbitrariness. These things, it's ironic. It's all part of this BS about this defense for the defense, that what I'm talking about is like deep. It should be like reverse. The stuff I'm talking about is stuff that mixes with our everyday thinking constantly, right? It's the most useful stuff. We're always using it, and by crossing off major errors, they can be crossed off forever if we understand them properly. And then people spend so much of their time, almost all, in a lot of cases, really all their time, looking in the wrong place in life to be successful and so forth. Even on a practical level with business, if people understand that business is, or making money, is based in the idea of value for others, and value is determined if someone voluntarily is going to pay their own money for something, then it's valuable to them. Value isn't some inherent thing. It's inherent within that. That's what makes monetary value, is whether a person is going to spend their own money on it and how much. That's it. There's no other, and there's other ideas of value that people have, but that's it. That's the one thing of value. And regarding making money, now there's other things that can matter in life, but regarding making money, and I'm not saying that you need to maximize this, but regarding making money, that's it. And by understanding that it's about one and only one thing, I've talked about it's about building your offer, just a restatement of this same thing. What can you build, create for yourself, that other people will pay their own money for? And the most of their own money for, right? Why is one of the reasons? There's many reasons OMG is helpful, but one of them is that it definitely provides that kind of thing for you guys. As opposed to a lot of programs aren't really exactly about, they really ignore value, and they're much more about this supposed blueprint for kind of short-circuiting value almost, rather than being fundamentally about building value. When you know that anything to do with making money, and if you're stuck with making money in any way or stuck going to the next level, when you know to focus here, Kyle, and this helps answer your question, and this helps give you an example of doing the answer to your question. People spend so much of their focus outside of specifically creating value. They have all sorts of other shortcuts or ways that they look at making money, none of which are as correct as it's about what you having something other people will pay for. Once you think of it that way, then you can see why you need a USP, a unique selling proposition. It doesn't have to be unique in the whole world, but it needs to be unique in where the other person is looking, right? Because then you'll be in a bidding war with whoever else is in that person's attention field, right, or awareness field, and kind of, I mean that in a very simplistic way, just what I obviously mean by it, right? The potential person is going to pay you money. If there's a whole bunch of people they're aware of that have the same USP or don't have the same USP because there's a whole bunch, then you're going to be in a bidding war with those people, right, all the way down to minimum wage or less. So you want to create, right? The only way, I can't make a program that can give everybody a totally unique USP. I can give you one that'll give you a USP in general, right? But not, a USP compared to people outside the program. But that's why I also try to set you up, and I set the program up in a way where you could also be creative within the program. And you could poke around and explore in different ways and unique ways. And almost everyone can make their own kind of permutation and discoveries and so forth. And I'm setting you up for that. That's part of what I've baked into OMG. And it's not the kind of thing anyone could copy unless I just told them that, because it's kind of invisible. They wouldn't think in that way. But I make it so that you can kind of poke around and make your own USP. And then people tell me, oh, it's a disorganized or something. But anyway, if you realize that's the only place you want to focus, that's still a huge area to focus in, but it's much more narrow than having otherwise. By having more and more things like that, and then you can narrow it further. And you could do this in all kinds of places with relationships, where how do I spend my time most effectively in relationships, getting what I want out of a relationship, including the other person being happy is, of course, one of the things you might want. But the more you develop you build things that are relevant, that come up a lot, And they'll often be characterized as deep, but again, I've made fun of that already. How is it deep if it's constantly used? I mean, is that thing about value, is that deep? I mean, it's just helpful, right? Whether it's deep or not is a weird kind of distinction. It's kind of overall, this idea of is something deep is pretty much mostly an unhelpful distinction. Probably more of that defense thing, right? Trying to keep you from looking at things too closely. So yeah, so you develop more things that you can know, and that'll cross off your where you're looking around and narrow your correct focus. And then you can do your best choice because you're only having to look around in a smaller area, so you can make a better choice. If we take a supermarket shelf of jelly and we put a bunch of bad, untasty, unhealthy jellies in there, then that's purely going to make your best choice harder. Be less, not even harder is the wrong, it'll be less efficient for you to make the right choice, right? The more you're able to make distinctions and exclude groups of jellies correctly, down to fewer and fewer jellies to pick from, then the more efficiently you're going to use your time and focus in making the right decision. And what I do, the way I make decisions, is in that kind of inverse way. I keep cutting things out. It's like the way that some people talk about being a sculptor. I don't know anything about being a sculptor, but this phrase is kind of a useful metaphor. The idea is that the sculpture's already in there, and they're just cutting out the part that isn't there, right? And that is how I make decisions. And Cotton, had this forever when we got in the webinar and said that I'm always right. I'm not saying I'm always right at all, but the fact that I even managed to fake it well enough that Cotton would say that after a year and a half working with me is, and he would say like I at least always get it right or something like that. But however he put it, but just the humorous thing is that it's so effective, and the way I do it is specifically this: is I cut out, I'm eliminating things that I know have to be wrong until there's so little in there that I can just see, oh, that's right, right? When it's a small enough area that you're looking at, you can see the rest is wrong too. You're like, oh, that's the best, or if if you say like, what's the biggest, who's the I don't know, whatever. But if you narrow it down to only a very few choices that you can all see distinctly, then you can pick the one that's the best. If there's too many choices, it's too confusing for your focus, and the incorrect choices get in your way, and you can't see clearly. Let me skip over to the other group in case there's anything there. My ignoring the group might have caused it to go dormant, but we'll see. No. Is this the book? Yes, I believe it is. That's the book that that Bobby posted. So is this why we are often seeking for control in life? Because we are trying to counter the feeling? Exactly right, Sherilyn. Exactly right. She asked us an hour ago, but exactly. Everything to do with control. As I've been discovering this closer and closer, I've been giving you closer and closer models over the years, although my original stuff is still weirdly helpful, and kind of some of it's kind of surface helpful also in a way that's kind of immediately useful. The 2013 series is still very helpful. But I've talked about you want to go for understanding rather than control, and this is what I was trying to get at, but I didn't realize it clearly enough myself. But I was approximating to this very closely, is this idea, is we don't need to have control. When we realize that we have power, because I've been working on this idea of what's our power, and narrowing it down, but by asking the question, I knew that I had a power that couldn't be stopped. I knew it was related to seeking understanding. I knew it was related to the power to have more good, and that it wasn't related to just making the world all the way that I wanted it, getting everyone to stand in just the right place and do the right thing that I want them to do and have just the right decorations around or the right amount of money in my bank account, because what does the money do? The money is just used to get people to do stuff, right? So it's just a shortcut for influencing people to do stuff. It's a shortcut I appreciate, and it's also a way to trade perceived value. I respect money. I'm not denigrating it whatsoever. But if you're using it for control, remember, you can build this nice, beautiful fortress, or it doesn't have to be a fortress anymore, but you can build a beautiful mansion, right, to live in that's beautiful and good, and other people can come in too, and they can get ideas, and they can build their mansion, and you can help each other and all that. So instead of a fortress, you can think of it like a mansion. You still build it, right, including money, relationships, and everything. But when it's not based on this helplessness, it's beautiful. And right, it's not about, you're not building it to control. You're building it to have more goodness. Badness you dissolve. You don't need to fight badness, you dissolve it. It's like with a light. Mike loves this illustration. A light doesn't fight darkness. Think about that. It just wins, right? If you shine a light in darkness, it doesn't fight against the darkness. We could project that onto it, but that's not what's going on. The light just it doesn't overcome darkness. It just, by being light, there's no more darkness. It immediately dissolves the darkness. And that's how life can be, roughly speaking, metaphorically speaking. Voting is arbitrary as well. The idea that a majority know better than the minority is absurd, right? That's correct. I'm glad I didn't upset people. It's probably a relatively favorable audience. I'm sure not totally, but for general libertarianism. We've read it again and again that David and I have been primarily pursuing spreading LOI as our career for years now, at least 10 years together explicitly, and David even longer, yeah. Yeah, that's why we're doing this. Not that I mind, don't mind having the Rolls Royce, but it kind of came as an accident. As built things bigger than I expected. I was trying to get about $3,000 a month so I could just have a stable base, and overshot that by a little bit. There needs to be a rewind button on the live webinars because some of the stuff I need to hear. That's so awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. We'll have it, and I'll get that MP3 faster this time. Thanks for whoever reminded me about that. That makes the replay more useful, yeah. Yep, totally rewatching. Yeah. This is going to be one of those rewatchers for sure. I pack a lot of stuff, but I'm doing the best I can. It would be a bit easier to follow if we were all in one place. I agree. For some other reasons, we were thinking of trying to get, one of the things is that we didn't want to starve out either of these groups that we have. And we would wanted people that are in the NHB team group not to kind of get starved out of attention. We could be an OMG way. I actually am thinking of moving over to the OMG way for other reasons, but at least we stimulated some stuff in here. So I'll probably do that next time. We could be an OMG way. We can plan on that. Is our power variable? Probably not. Probably not. It's more of an on or off switch. For it to be variable, there'd have to be a reason why it would be variable. It's more like the effect of our power can snowball, but the power itself is more of an on or off switch. And one way of characterizing it, I've tried to characterize it a bunch of different ways, still try to understand it better and better, but it has to do with seeking understanding. It has the effect of causing creation to happen, like when I have our power switched on properly, or maybe it's a matter of where it's focused. Maybe it's always on, but if it's focused in the wrong place, it might as well be off. That's a good question, and this is what stuff I'm still working on. This is a work in progress, but I've progressed so far that I want to share with you, as you can see why, what I have at this point. I'm glad you asked that question. That's a great question. I noticed fairly early on how powerful David's dissolving fear video was, and how broadly, yeah, it's kind of a nice sweet spot for new people too, where it's useful enough that I don't need to give people the whole sledgehammer for a long time before we may get to square one, right? I'm still in the getting nugget stage. I can't wait till it's second nature. That's so nice, but I'm so nice that you see it as a stage. The main thing is I just don't want people feeling like that's the only thing to get from this. Someone's typing. I might cut them off for a moment, but I'll cut this short pretty soon, and we'll just keep continuing. I'm not going to let these threads. I'm going to, at some point, I'll get back to some of these things in threads. Oh, you like the rolls? Oh, I know. No, that's I highly recommend. Unbelievable, the thing they make. The interesting thing, again, is how little they're driven overall. There's enough money out there in the world that if people didn't have some mental block, they'd be driving them more. Because it's really something to drive a Rolls Royce. It's in a sense, depending on how much you don't like making money. But if you kind of like it, it's one of those things that's almost worth shooting for. It's obviously not as a stable base thing, and you have to get some other stuff before you get a Rolls, right? You don't get it with your first $400,000. Presumably you pay off your house and get some retirement and some cash on hand first. You don't want to have a Rolls Royce, be one of those people that doesn't have the $1,000, right? In an emergency, they do these surveys where like 2/3 of people don't have that, which I'm not denigrating, by the way. I understand it, but okay. The way that we persuade them the way that we accomplish anything tough is like you operate from the context. And at some point, there's the same thing with getting clients. If you're not getting the fruit, you go further and further out into the context for a place you do have leverage. All right? If you feel too low energy to get yourself out to a place where you might potentially meet someone that might help you meet a client, then take some multivitamins or take a drink of coffee or an energy drink. You farther and farther out into the context, like, well, you keep asking, well, what'll give me some kind of, you're looking for a foothold, and you go from there. I have come to, what I would say is the understanding that the only way to get to them, right, you can't fight all the cops and all the enforcers and federal agents and so forth. But as far as I could tell, I could try to get a big enough following to do that, but it just doesn't seem like it makes sense. I mean, they'd probably stop me if I was advocating that, right, and then nip it in the bud. But what we can do, here's the reason we can win. Here's the reason you can win individually in your own life, and here's the reason we can win overall. You can win if you can make progress that won't go backwards. And the fundamental idea of LOI has to do with, there's a few things that are logic related. They're all kind of fundamental because they're all part and part. They're kind of different angles in the same thing. I'm going to deal directly with this issue of how do we know what's true. And I'm going to do it fairly soon. Oh, that's so nice. Yes, 2 times a week. I'm going to do it fairly soon. If there's a way that we can understand what's true in a way that we won't go back, that feedback won't matter. Just like, to use a somewhat trivial but also real example, we can understand that 2 plus 3 plus 7 equals 12. In a way where we won't go back. And even if someone says, well, David, do you really know that? I'll tell you this. The only way to fight or change the idea in my head or in anyone's head that understands it, that 2 plus 3 plus 7 equals 12, is to address it at its own level and show where the math is wrong. If they say, well, I'm just a rat bastard, or I've been wrong all about all these other things in my life, or I'm funny looking, or they don't like the tone of my voice, or they don't like the potential tone of my voice. I've never heard that one. But that we know is not addressing it. So no matter how certain I am of various truths, it's okay. I still can be open to being corrected. And it seems like an oxymoron or like a contradiction, but it's not. It's still, people can challenge it as long as they're challenging it on its own merits that they're addressing. If someone were to say to me, I'm open. If someone were to say, no, David, you can have a legitimate government, here's how. Or we do have one, here's how. Then that's okay, I'll listen. I'm not trying to protect being helpless. I'd love to hear it. I'd rather hear that. Yeah, I don't like coming to the conclusion of this. I'd love to just pay my taxes with glee and feel like, wow, this is the best, $700,000 I ever spent or whatever, depending on the year or what's going on. But this is the best money I've ever spent. That would be great. I'd be much happier, right? And a lot of people believe that. They're on a local peak, right? You have to go through kind of a valley to get out the other end of realizing how wrong it is. It's much better to just believe that our government's wonderful and I can't wait to pay my taxes. It's patriotic. And same with jury duty. People feel like it's their duty to be enslaved. I don't feel that way. And so, it's a little harder until we kind of come out the other end in some cases like that. But the way we persuade is we get our ideas so correct that we understand them. We're not protecting helplessness, so we can argue for them in a way where we're not defensive. And you lock anyone in a room with me long enough, and they'll come over to my side. Both my best friend Mike and my wife have the similar religious and political views to me, and neither had the same political or religious views when I met them. But they're my closest people to me because of their deeper attitude of wanting to be open to that, to see what's true. And then I got them, over time because they care about what's correct. So the problem with, in a practical manner, and again, someone could show me why I'm wrong and it's okay, but I prefer conservatives in office to non-conservatives or liberals, practically speaking, in America. I don't mean in any country, but in America. But conservatism is wrong about all kinds of stuff. And the problem is, you see this on the level of teenagers and their parents. Teenagers will rebel against their parents. Liberalism is a little bit like a rebellion, or a lot like a teenage rebellion against conservatism. The only thing that's really coherent about American liberalism is antithetical to at least a caricature of conservatism. Not even conservatism itself, but like a caricature. But the reason for that rebellion is conservatism is wrong in enough cases that just like parents might be more right than their young kids about things, but they're still wrong about all kinds of stuff, perennial, like constantly, and then that's what causes the rebellion. But if you get it right to begin with, then you don't cause the backlash and the rebellion. I'm looking to demonstrate that to you when my son's a teenager. I don't expect the same backlash. But we'll see. I know people are going to say, oh, wait a second, you see that? But we'll see. But I mean, that's not the kind of thing I have full control over, so I'm not being totally arrogant about that. But still, that theory is sound, right? You get the backlash by being too overconfident about something that's not fully right. And again, conservatives aren't fully right. And again, they tend to praise government enforcers, and they tend to be okay with taxation in a way that is really just, fundamentally wrong. I've had over 3 million stuff. Some things are hard to let go, but you need to, exactly. We can also look at it like we're fighting most effectively. Thanks, mind blown again and again and again. Wow, great. Got a great group in OMG. I've said some pretty tough stuff, and this is pretty nice. It's a great question, too. What are recommendations for not blocking the power we have? We'll stick with what I've done now, but I'm gonna give some thought on more that I can say about that. What's the biggest tax check they get you for? Close to 700 last year, 1,000. The one that really almost broke me psychologically was 100,000 like 8 or 9 years ago. And it was the first time I made a lot of money, and I didn't really understand how to consistently make money for sure at that point. I mean, I actually did understand, but I didn't know that I wasn't sure about how it all worked, and I didn't emotionally connect to feeling like I can definitely keep going, especially keep going in kind of a way that I also wanted to get to LOI stuff more specifically, right? And but there were some errors that I had, by the way, at that time that I had to work through. But that was tough. When it was 6 figures, that was like about as much as I made during my entire 20s, and I did, with the money left over, I was able to pay off a house that was about $250,000. But I didn't have much money left over after that, and my wife hoped to have a child, and I just didn't feel like we could at that point, and we didn't, because I didn't feel. But with that 100,000, and the trouble, it's not just 100,000; it's year after year that's going to keep coming, and then that comes the pain that comes with that. So you get that approach avoidance with making money. But again, we ultimately have to accept it and move forward. My way of dealing with it, there's different ways of dealing with it. All kinds, they're really valid. If you can make money into like something that's kind of your hobby, and you enjoy it that way, then great. Then you just, if you feel like money's going to keep coming in, there's plenty of it, probably easier to deal with taxation. Another way is to kind of quantify it and reach that point, and so forth. But LOI is worth my entire payments to OMG. So grateful to you. Well, thank you. Thank you, Shima. I'm going for 10 million bucks worth, and I'm not joking. In this Alchemy series, defined in the following way. Defined this way, that if after you go through this Alchemy series, or even already, but after you go through it, and if you had a friend, and the proposition is the only way your friend could get this information would be to earn $10 million and then purchase it, would you recommend they go do that? And you would tell them, absolutely, go do that. That's how I measure that I'm shooting for 10 million with how much Alchemy is worth. Of course, can't charge that much, so I'm not going to try. But love this. It gets the word out to question, think, never assume, right? And we can stipulate. And the trouble with just never assume by itself is it cuts the legs out from people without giving a replacement. We need to give people a replacement to assuming, which is not just stipulating, but it's stipulating plus the rest of the method of understanding what's true. And it needs to be taught in school, or we need to just not have our kids in school until and unless, right? We need to have a society where there's much more of a support network, because boy, is it tough to have a kid right now, because everywhere you turn, your kid's going to get the wrong ideas. So this stuff, it's tough. The only place they're going to get it's from you, and that creates a tough situation. Turn your job into continuous prayer to God. How do you interpret this? Our highest good and good of all. And to me, God is a real being, not the same as us, but that's all-powerful understood properly. Sometimes people have all-powerful, but they define it in a way of accomplishing something that's logically impossible. God can't do things that are logically impossible because those things don't exist. They're just words that refer to nothing. But my understanding of God is that God's aware. God's an intentional being, not just an overall concept or something. No, I would say absolutely. I mean, I pray as kind of a on kind of a bit of a continuous basis, like kind of my understanding of God is God's right there, and aware of what we're aware of, and it's all part of the situation. But yeah, you can make everything into a similar expression. I kind of split things into like you want a hobby, something that's just fun for you. You want purpose, and you can blend these things, but only if they blend naturally. For me, they kind of don't. Oh, they kind of do, and they kind of don't. You can't just force it though. You need some sleep. You need to eat. Then a hobby, which is sort of like I distinguish rest of both sleep and rest from hobby, but in that is what people talk about recreation. And then you need to have some sort of stable base of money or some substitute for that I'm not aware of. I don't know of a way to get along without money. I think one might exist. I just don't know of it. So instead, since that's the best I know, just a stable base of money. And then you want purpose and a hobby. Purpose is generally related to the overall idea of something to do with making the world better without a limit. And the more you can blend those things together, the better. But until and unless you can blend them all, sometimes you can't blend it perfectly. Part of the issue of making money is making money, don't confuse this. Making money is about what other people put a monetary value on. Some people will tell you what you want to hear, which is that you can make money based on what you put a monetary value on. If by coincidence what you put a great monetary value on is something that you can provide with a unique selling proposition and other people will pay you for it, great. But until and unless you have that, you just got to do what, and if you can blend those things together decently, then great, you can make more money than you need. Worst case, you can't blend them very well. Excuse me. And then you do what you have to do to make money without stepping on other people's property rights. Now, I don't outside of fraud or anything like that. That I don't condone. Anything to do with property rights violation is off limits. Golden rule, even down to the insects. Thanks, David. What's the best order? The 2013 series is good. Breakthrough. God, I don't know that there's really, I had been asked this before, and I'm not trying to cop out, and I think it's a very valid question, but I don't have a good answer. The 2013 series, probably listen to it all at least once isn't going to kill you, is going to be helpful, and then you can think about what to listen to again. Breakthrough stacking is pretty awesome. The fear one's really great. If it depends also on your own needs. The 2013 series is a surprisingly good place to start, actually, especially because you have Alchemy. Alchemy combined with the 2013 series is pretty great, and the breakthrough stacking is pretty super. I'll close things down in a moment here. Thank you. What I'm learning from your teaching of LOIs give me a foundation I need to move forward without confusion. Look forward. Thank you, Angela. That's so nice. Creativity was awesome. Oh, thank you. I think in the 2013 series, exactly. Some of the things thank you, Ansel. Some of the things I'm covering now will display a deeper understanding of some things that I gave more of a surface model for in the 2013, but those surface models are pretty effective. Can a being be limited by its nature or by being? The way it works is there's one unlimited being, and that's God, and the rest of us are kind of inherently limited. We're not really limited even so much by God. It's a little bit more by logic or whatever, but God can't create a being anything like us and give it unlimited power. It needs to give it a kind of a set amount of power, and that's it. If it was unlimited, then the minute you contradicted God, then you'd figure out which one of you was limited and which one of you wasn't. And if you never ever contradict God, then you're functionally identical. So if you're autonomous, then you're inherently going to be limited. So the real question is understanding that leverage point of your real power that you have. And it's an awesome, exciting way to look at life. And that's what LOI is really all about, is understanding that lever for your power. And as you can see, it's, at this point I've demonstrated enough, luckily, that it's practical, just by stuff I've created and what I've achieved, that just, it's easy to get people in the door, it seems. So that's great. So between appreciation and curiosity, which one's curiosity? I mean, not appreciation. I'm curious. I'm curious about how to make it all better, genuinely, right? But then there's priorities. Oh, that's pretty much the main way that I deal with government, is priorities. And I focus on where I think I have the most leverage, right? And right now it's understanding LOI, I'm getting my foundation under me with explaining it. With you guys are awesome, and you guys will presumably help testify for me to get this word out more as I market it. Marketing it allows me to release a lot of it for, a bunch of stuff for free in the marketing, but it makes it seem more valuable when it's tied to something, and then it allows people to be affiliates. And so weirdly, I think by a business model, I've thought about this. There's a lot of temptation just to have it all be free. Then I don't have to worry about collecting money and all the pain that goes with that. Of course, there's benefit to collecting money. You get money. But I think by having a business model will, for now, allow me to spread it best. But yeah, I mean, just don't prioritize coming straight after government right now, except to the extent that I've just done, right? The more we understand, as individuals, understand government, then we don't have kids that grow up to be supporters of government because they're rebelling against us, Boy, it's something with entrepreneurs. Either all the people that hate me right now are being quiet, or that I don't have a lot of upsetment for talking kind of directly about government. Is there a regular schedule for these sessions? Probably more in the evenings, but I'll get a few. But it'll be on Mondays through June, and I'll probably do maybe one more afternoon and the rest evening, something like that. And then in July, August, September, October will be a little bit interrupted by OMG Live. I might do a little bit in November to make up for it or something. But I'll probably have one weekend session and one weekday session. Maybe stick with Mondays and then do one weekend session. You're welcome, Vincenzo. I appreciate that. Okay, we can cut this one off. We always have to cut these off before I can go through everything perfectly. But we will continue next Monday, and I was looking forward to this all week. Getting moving, I want to getting moving with this. Need to wait a little bit so that we can market it to a greater audience for when I double up, or else I would just double up right now. But have to wait a little bit. But now I do this all immediately if I could. Just kind of get everyone on here and keep going. Marathon session for a few days, and just get it all if that was plausible. But I don't see that being the way now. Maybe in the future I'll do that sometimes. Do marathon OMG cramming sessions. I love marathons. You're welcome, guys. You're welcome very much. You're welcome, Gay. You're very welcome, Peter. You are welcome. Entrepreneurs or free thinkers tend to want to break the rules that need to be crossed. Right, yeah, very true. Another reason why this is where I'm looking to build the leverage, right? Where do you operate in the context? Why did I build OMG? Is all, it's pretty contextual, but it's kind of right on the, or at least my best guess into what would be the good way to move forward with law of implication. It's pretty cool with social media these days, right? You have a few hundred people on your side, and you can blow anything up with social media. It's pretty awesome. So I think we're really on the right track for saving the world, getting this idea out there, and in a way where we'll keep making progress. We get more and more people, and the people we get, they won't go back. That's exciting. And then more people be born, and we'll get those guys and so forth. On your side, that's awesome. Don't worry about talking about difficult subjects like illegitimacy of government. We could take. I appreciate that. And I tried to pound it, too hard. And it's not that nice to think about. I try to focus other places as within reason. But I wanted to hit one kind of pervasive thing, right? It's kind of shocking. And don't get cocky if you are very much of a libertarian mindset like I am. Remember that we're all going to have things where probably, at first, that are going to be tough maybe for us to address. generally the idea, if we're a good person, are we smart, are we competent, but all those things we want to let go of in order to build them up properly. Like let go of, you don't have to believe you're incompetent, but just like as I talked about, or God's existence, right? If you believe in God, you're going to want, when I visit the showing how to know that God exists and the nature of God, whatever your beliefs about God, you're going to want to be able to take on the idea. You don't have to set them aside or anything, but we just operate in a safe space, safe zone, where we can take a look at the question for real. Because only by taking a look at it for real can we get the answer for real. And we spread the meme, right? The idea of being able to calmly take a look at any question, as long as we're addressing it in the proper terms, not, you're a jerk or, that kind of thing. We entrepreneurs are trying to break out of the boxes we have. Exactly. I had a cool thought the other day that entrepreneurship is like applied philosophy, right? It's like we're the real philosophers in essence, and we kind of prove it on the game plan of building something, not just money. Could be that we're building something that really helps people. However we do it. I don't have a problem with measuring by money, but there's other standards too. Trying to do something, but it's kind of like applied philosophy, right? That's why books for entrepreneurs and self-improvement books and everything, they're basically a philosophy, right? But they're applied to actually making money or building a business to provide value for people. I'll brush up on this, but the God particle, but mainly it's just people. You don't need a God particle. God's not a particle, and God particles aren't part of God. God, it's a different sort of thing with God. God's an unlimited aware being that made us on purpose and wants us all to be happy. But to do that, to make the possibility of that, then we have enough power and will to make an impact on things. This means there's opportunity. Notice that when people make video games, they incorporate problems into the video games, or else there's no meaning to doing anything. And that's an imperfect metaphor, but at least gives a sense of how God made things for us. Perception of jerkiness is arbitrary. That's great. Unless the person is trampling on someone else's property rights. It's kind of a jerky thing. Although that doesn't make them a jerk overall. Like I really want to make a difference. I talked about the difference between an overall judgment of competence of a person, which we don't want to do, including ourselves, versus a specific judgment of competence with a particular task, which we have to do. Same thing with ideas and actions. We can judge an action to be immoral, but one of the things that lets us do that is we want to fully get away from judging a person overall as being a moral or immoral person, because we don't know where they're starting from and so forth. And we all have to figure things out, right? We all start from somewhere and have to work on things. So it's a difference between me saying that a particular action or system that a person's operating under is immoral and me judging the person overall. Just like there's a difference between me saying this person sucks at SEO and saying that they're an incompetent person overall. Applied philosophers, entrepreneurs. Isn't that great? Applied philosophy. I love it. You are most welcome, guys. Okay. I like this part. Can't tell lie. I appreciate it. Screen sharing. Something says paused. I hope nothing's really paused. Oh, gee. Screen sharing is paused. I wonder how long it's been paused for. Sorry if it's been paused for a while. Some should have told me if it was. Anyway, we are good. Maybe someone tell me something here. Okay. I really am ending it now.